In 2063, it all started with the exit of the exciting game of Sword and Magic. It was a VRMMORPG, where players could be reincarnated in characters of different races and fascinating battles using swords and magic. As soon as the main character was about to leave the game, he was already waiting for him a little unexpected. He was approached by a girl with blonde hair and greeted him with the words, "Good morning, Mr. Pepperon." The protagonist, sitting on the throne of the King Demons, said that this long-awaited day had finally come. Depren was a king of the notorious Septum and a master of sword and magic. This team game has become an unexpected success. Ironically, this organization sought to combine different races for world domination. In the game, the capture mode is only available for 7 weeks for the weakest of the 35 possible races that are present in the world of sword and magic. And he chose a role from one of these races of dwarves. At first, he could not cope with the lightest rivals, and that's how the game ended for him. Thanks to the right approach, the force became fashionable, regardless of race. Pepperon founded a kingdom called Glutton, which became a famous septum. They have developed and have already won a quarter of the world. Her friend was a girl, an Elfian named Lala, and asked the hero about the following actions. They were waiting for his instructions. Although elves had natural beauty and power, they did not have much status. Accident with an arrow, their harm still left much to be desired. The distinguishing of the characters remained excessive, unlike real people, as in video game. The girl was waiting for orders, and the hero felt the time to complete the game. He decided to take advantage of the exit function and stop the session for today. He had a short moment in front of Pepperon to choose. Does he really want to get out of the game? Waiting for the exit. Pepperon wondered that everything lasts endlessly for a long time, and only a black void around. He came to the conclusion that something probably happened. Finally, the guy noticed a blurry picture before his eyes. He was glad that something was finally appeared. Before him was a girl who called Mr. Pelleperin. The shaft was frantically rejoiced that Mr. Pepperin finally woke up. The hero was on the bed and could not understand why he was faced with the Elfian. The girl reported that Lord had slept for 3 days, and she had already begun to worry about him. It looked strange, because something else was felt in Pepperon's thoughts. Lala was excited and suggested that Lord had become ill. The young man looked at the girl in surprise. Graphics in Sword and Magic was really incredible, as if the game had become a reality. He decided to wait for what he saw, because it was difficult to believe his own eyes. Pepperon viewed his hands with horror, certain that he got to another world. But it's just incredible. The Ice Guy was a peak of popularity several decades ago. Now it became a classic. The girl continued to look at the hero, asking what could serve the owner. Pepper reached out to the girl and apologized, lightly touching her cheeks. She immediately scattered and sighed heavily. His hand gently slid into her ear, as if he had touched a living creature. From this touch, the Ellen was swollen by her eyes. Ever before, a virtual game was so realistic. When the hero tried to touch the girl from head to feet, he could not even believe that such a game could exist. Lala shyly said the name of Mr. Pepperon. The young man stood thoughtfully, and the elusive search thought he had finished. Pepin pinched him for his cheek, forcing the girl to shudder. Lala did not understand what Mr. Pepin raps. Games allowed you to feel a slight pain by changing settings. However, it was forbidden to connect the pain. Even if you hit your feet on the cabinet in the game, you will feel almost nothing. The software was set up in this way, so neither the firmware nor the modifications could change it. In the world of swords and magic, the hero could not understand why he was still not sitting on the throne. He did not even realize where he was. Before leaving the game, he was in the royal palace, and thought. Goperin was stunned and concluded that he was the same house he built at the beginning of the game. Maybe after moving his kingdom disappeared, leaving only the first hut. And of all the lands he conquered, it was the Lala who remained with him, the worst of the possible options. And all this happened after all his suffering. The guy asked the girl if Lal knew their location, but the elf shook his head sadly. They say he did not know. Pepper thought about what happened to the partition of Gloria. Lal did not even have time to realize that there were only 2 remaining here. The girl denied that this was not the case because there were others here. Goblin Hus, Titan Nobo, Stone Pachi, as well as the Wise Demon and Harpia. Everyone but her went for intelligence to find out more about this place. She was left to take care of Mr. Pepper. The man was convinced that there was no one else here except Lalai and her satellites. Lala was worried, believing that Mr. Pepper should rest, but he assured that he was feeling well. He just wanted a sip of fresh air, so he went to the door. Lala immediately agreed to make him accompany, but he opened the door, seeing what was around him. It was difficult for him to believe his eyes. They were on the Taoshan Plain. It was on these endless spaces of the Taoshan Plain that he laid his first stronghold. Subsequently, he expanded his possessions. The village first appeared, then a town, and later formed a whole city. This is how the glorious Gloria Septimus arose. Pepin was angry that all this had disappeared. As he predicted, his kingdom went out. Lala suddenly began to talk about Gloria Septimus with a clear sorrow, because she also disappeared. I calmed down and came to the conclusion that it is likely. He also began to think about what status they have now. If the country is gone, then they must not exist. But according to their outfit, everything seemed in order. Pepperon tried to check the status and prepared that the window would appear, but nothing happened. The screen was empty, and the hero thought how to find out the state of things now. He decided to try to jump. Pepperon jumped and hanged high above the ground, which was able to surprise Lala. All the basic parameters remained stable and did not change. If the height of the jump did not change, it could be assumed that other indicators also remained the same. The hero decided to find out Lala if her status changed, and she confirmed that the changes were, but not like others. So the guy decided to check the magical abilities. Having reached out, Pepperon caused a flame and thought that everything was working properly. But he decided to try his abilities differently. Changing the position of his hands, he called on a huge flame. Now they realized that it was a world of swords and magic. He was convinced that since nothing had changed, he would be able to use all his spells. But it seems that only basic spells were available. Together with his subordinates, the hero moved here, and there was no trace left of Gloria. Although the parameters remained unchanged, the use of magic has become limited. Pepper looked at Lala, who was no longer an uncontrolled character. If so, then others are obviously able to feel. At a low level of trust in the world of sword and magic, subordinates could betray him. But the behavior of Lala showed that her trust remained at the maximum. Obviously, the same situation should be with others. However, the further development of events remained a mystery. It was impossible to predict how the subordinates react, finding that their country had disappeared. They could test, even raise the riot. If all this was only a game, Pepperon would be indifferent. Suddenly a cry heard from behind. Even before the hero was able to turn, a girl rushed to his neck. With joy that the gentleman woke up, she hugged him with all her strength. From surprise, the girl cried out and dropped him to the ground, telling how much she was worried about him. Lala was scattered and trying to stop these embrace. She could not understand why the girl allowed herself and ordered to remove, pulling her by the collar. Fanaya was a harp with her wings but could not fly. Suddenly, a guy with horns appeared on the threshold, interested why so noisy. Lala shouted from home that Pepperon is too exaggerating her fantasies. The young man was glad that the ruler finally woke up. It was Goblin Hus, a representative of one of the most famous, though not very strong races, and this game was no exception. Among the 7 weak races, they were the fastest, so they could still need. Gus reported that the rest was already approaching them. A girl named Irie appeared at the door, proclaiming her arrival. Elbow was titanium and apologized for being outside. His race was extremely large and incredibly strong, but their speed was not the best. Although their attack potential was extremely high, they did not use it completely. The hero realized that the Nobo is too big to enter inside. In this situation, the guy decided that the whole operation would be externally. Nobo was frightened because he could not force Mr. Pepperon to do it for him. But Pepperon just smiled and assured that none of his subordinates would leave on the street. When everyone gathered and came out, the hero thanked everyone for his presence and asked them to report on the situation. The Kerosene decided to start with himself and said he was heading to the northeast. The landscapes remained pristine, as well as the creation of a glorious septum. In the same direction are Birken Caves, where all the monsters once were destroyed and a mine was built. However, the same monsters settled there again. Titan Nobo said that he went to reconnaissance to the northwest. It all remained unchanged except the missing structures in the area. Also, Lake Fana was still in the northwest, but the large farm that surrounded it became invisible. Venezia told about her adventures in the west. She was sad that she could not fly, so Mr. Pepperon built a Chicago for her. Unfortunately, it also disappeared. It upset her even more. He reported the study of the eastern part. He mentioned the former meadow where he kept the captured dragon, and now there is a wasteland. It was very upset by Nobo, because he traveled the whole world by order of the king to catch this dragon. The latter returned to Irai, who went south, where the Rufu volcano should be. She created a place for the extraction of mana after many research. But unfortunately, there is nothing left. It is unfortunate, because the fruits of her hard work simply disappeared. This place returned the hero to the past, when they were again at a time where the glorious septum did not exist. If their country really disappeared, Pepin wondered about the possibility of dissolving their group. In the game, he was undoubtedly a good king who confidently led his subjects. However, in real life, he was not so sure of whether he could repeat it. In real life, he was an ordinary student. Finally, he would just pull them all behind him, getting their dislike. The group asked the hero what to do, because there was nothing left. Pepperon thought he could live without friends, because he had all his wisdom he needed. He decided to inform the group that they had to disperse here. Pepperon asked everyone to listen carefully, but suddenly Lala interrupted him, asking if they knew what had happened to them. Beginning with a small hut, gradually increasing the number of subordinates and exploring technologies for their strengthening, the hero raised the slack, growing the population, establishing settlements and cities, and later. In the end, he won other nations and created the most powerful famous septum in the world, for one generation. This is the great dream of Lalai about the famous hero of Mr. Pepperon. She was convinced that if everyone followed Mr. Pepperon, they would be able to revive Gloria Septum here and conquer this world. The team supported it, and Pepperon remained standing, stunned by all these events. The Kerosene replied that all this is due to the extremely steep king. Harpia supported him. I am sure that their ruler will be able to erect a castle again in the clouds and create a utopia where there will be no starvation. He was ready to go with his master anywhere, because it was always interesting to him. Irie noted that research of advanced technologies will certainly help them to revive Gloria Septum in the near future. Pepperin opened his mouth with surprise, and his crown flew. He realized that the continuation in the same spirit did not promise anything good. Realizing this, he realized that it would be worth giving up this idea. But even having it thought, he could not make himself surrender. Watching the devoted group, the guy felt inconvenience. It seemed unrealistic in such a situation. He thought that, as a regular Japanese, simply could not but solve the problem. Otherwise, it would no longer stand. The guy smiled and called for friends to believe in him because he is a great hero of Pepperon. Grasping his fist, he suggested that his friends revive Gloria Septum and conquer this world. All enthusiastically raised their hands, supporting the hero. Thus began the world dominance of Pepperon. The second expansion to another world starts with the unification of 7 weak races. First of all, it was necessary to do 3 things, and the hero decided that his team was fully understanding his intentions. The guest replied that you should earn money first and then buy a provision and water. You also need to collect building materials to expand the base. This is what Paparang said. Lala thought about the tasks and suggested to distribute responsibilities. They decided to divide into 3 groups. The first will be responsible for the supply of food and water, the second will be engaged in material deliveries, and the third, by the cashier. They considered how to optimally distribute responsibilities. Finanka and Gusts will be responsible for water and supplies. Nobo and Hearing will manage the materials. Lala, together with Mr. Pepperon and Eri, will be responsible for managing the treasury. Titan Nobo believed that duties were distributed perfectly, but doubted whether everyone could leave the base. Pepperon assured that there is nothing worth it, so you should not worry. The likelihood of destruction of the hut has existed, but its reconstruction would not be any complexity. The hero waved his hand, and Casey ordered everyone to take up his duties. First of all, the task of the Pepperon group was to fill the treasury. If he was not mistaken, there was a Cyclops den in the southwest. The hero agreed with Lord's thoughts. It was discouraged, remembering how Mr. Pepperon won them last time. In the possession of the sword and magic, dangerous boss monsters were located in different places, and there were many rare objects that could be profitable. If this world returned to its original state, there must be a layer of Cyclops. If their power remained the same, overcoming them will not be difficult. Lala accurately predicted it from their master and suggested that he deal with them as soon as possible. When a group of heroes approached the rocks, the guy said it was a place. He felt a terrible stench and immediately covered his nose. It was the scent of a real schedule. Not paying any attention to the smell, Eri looked forward and noted that they were approaching the den. Lala and Eri carefully came closer and looked carefully inside. Right in front of them was a healthy cyclop, which, returning, noticed uninvited guests. Grabbing a huge double, the cyclops struck it with all its power to the ground in front of the hero. Pepperon noted that the cyclop looks much more scary in reality than in the game. This resembled an invasion of someone else's home without an invitation. The murder of the owner and the abduction of all valuable. The cyclops swung his stick on the Pepperon, and the hero realized that there was nowhere. Devil from the blow, he pulled out his sword, realizing that the whole thing is in money. Sworn in irresolute, he jumped in response to the cyclop. With one movement, he broke through him, cutting off his hand that flew to the side. But in this world, its cold-bloodedness helped to remain calm. The one-eyed giant struck horror, seeing his detached hand, and desperately reached for her. Meanwhile, Aurora struck him with flames that absorbed the wound and began to bake. The monster fell dead, and Eric's exhaled with relief. Lal realized that they would cope without it, but all the treasures still need to be collected. Near the cave wall, they noticed a chest and several bags. They tried to open the chest, but it was closed and not exposed. Lala confidently showed her finger and stated that thanks to her skills in the release of castles, they will easily be able to open her. The girl caused several locks that were magically hanging in the air. At first, she used one lock, and then used a few more tools, after which the treasure chest dissolved. There were many precious stones in the chest, and there was an ancient magic folio. Eri recognized that book, and noted that it was a sorcery of a storm. If her assumption is right, it was a 5th book. Although it is not too powerful, it is still better than an 8-level fiery magic. Lala brought together everything you can sell. The nearest city is a choir. The hero urged to go there. Gas and Gas Group went in search of water and provisions. Looking at the gula, Harpia is interested in his partner, whether you can eat such a creature. The kerosene did not answer, however. Throwing his gaze on the prey, he decided to find out and try it. They looked at a huge snake that looked extremely dangerous. Finea remembered the capture of the Lord with such creatures. But Kerosene did not know what food it likes this hero, but he was sure that it was unlikely to treat snakes. Asia laughed immediately and decided that in this case it was not worth it. It didn't make sense to continue unless it satisfies the Lord. However, Hus believed that Pepperon would be happy with any gift from Harpy. The girl's eyes shined again. She realized that she could bring the snake to the Lord, and without delay, she rushed to the attack without waiting for Gus. Gus looked with a gloomy face toward Fincheshi, who had already escaped. He came to the conclusion that her strength is enough to cope with such an opponent, and went in search of water. Meanwhile, Finsesh has already caught up with the monster. Harpia was surprisingly fast. She cleverly circled around the snake, trying to knock it down from the panther. She pursued the snake, shouting that she was right in front of her. In the end, the confused snake lost patience and rushed to Phoenicia. Suddenly, Harpia disappeared and the snake began to look around. Phoenicia, trying to apologize, shouted that she was sorry for sitting on a snake, which did not even notice her. The girl waved his sword, piercing the snake. This was enough to destroy it and overthrow it to the ground. Standing near a dead snake, Harpia jumped out of joy, shouting that she had overcome it. The case has been done. Meanwhile, Nobo and I will take responsibility for the collection of materials. The first task was to find wood, because without it, you will do nothing. And finally, Mr. Pota's sword was handed over. He turned to Nobo, asking him to listen to his instructions. He noted to his partner that his sword was intended to protect important persons, not to cut trees. He will not forgive the one who will prevent the Purpuron's journey, but he could not stand aside without performing his duties. Nobo hinted that the huge sword of Pachaya was only suitable for this, which made Polya indignant to repeat. Raising to his feet and waving his sword, I will say that he was capable of anything. He is the captain of the Septim Strike, and cut the trees for him as a trifle. He simply could not understand why Nobo raises doubts about his determination. So he decided that he may have to make him silent on his own, although it seemed that he would still be more difficult to engage in a dispute with Phohanasius. They had no other way to cut down trees, so Titan suggested that it was their owner's idea. While waving a huge sword, he decided that you would not do anything, and, when you squeeze on a Nobo, he dumped a few trees at once. Looking at Pachai, Nobo lifted the tree and decided that this place would be perfect for work. His speed was so striking that even an experienced logger would have a tear. Only stumps remained from the trees. Nobo noted that his partner was cut too much, and it would be necessary to protect nature. He was nervous, looked at the Nobo and replied that then from the beginning it was necessary to say how many trees were needed. After that, it was necessary to move the stones, and I would hear slightly smiling, realizing that their work was not yet complete. The trees themselves are not enough, so they had to collect other useful materials. When they approached the rocky rocks, he decided that they should also be destroyed. However, the Nobo, who needed help, denied it, noting that it is optional. He could handle it on his own. Strung on a stone, he saw him began to crumble. He thought that it was possible to expect Titan. Taking a large part of the stone in his hands, Noble said he would carry it. He advised him to be careful, but Noble reassured a friend that everything is under control. Suddenly the earth was shaky under his feet, and a stone goal appeared in front of them. When the goal hit the ground, the smile disappeared from the face of the shooter. It seemed to him that his blow was somewhat weak. He jumped upwards, being behind the back of the golem and swinging his sword, getting ready to strike. He crumbled on a bunch of stones, and Nobo replied that they were lucky, what he surprised him. Nobo talked about the stones from which the goal consisted of, emphasizing how fascinating it was. It was easier to work than ordinary stones. It struck Poch, and he even suggested that he take it with him. The treasure team was reached the destination as part of Pepperon, Lalai, and Area. Pepperon proposed to start selling all the jewelry and the purchase of the necessary equipment. He put special emphasis on buying numerous magical books. The shopping list included tools for the construction and processing of materials. They needed to buy as much necessary things as possible to return with everything they need. Suddenly, someone ordered the Pepperon group to stop. The guard noticed the elf, the wise demon, and the hero from the dwarf tribe. He asked that they were holding in their hands, amazed at how so weak, in his opinion, races were so freely strolled by this territory. Poppern could not understand that it could have caused suspicion. The only ones who should be banned from entering the country were orcs, and their features should not influence decision-making. The guard suggested that the slaves could escape by stopping the property of the owners. The guy was amazed and explained that they just came to sell treasures from the cyclopine. The guard could not believe it. The guard stated that they would delay them for investigation and summon the assistants, announcing the suspects. The Pepperon team unexpectedly found itself in a difficult position. The heroes caused considerable suspicion of the guard, and Pepperon thought how to get out of this unexpected mess. The easiest way out is to simply escape. It was not a part of their plans to create an enemy in a neighboring town. But when the hero was already going to go, suddenly he heard the call of someone to stop and listen to him. She pointed her finger on the guard and asked if he was aware of who she was talking to. She reminded him that he was a well-known hero, the founder of the once majestic first state of the glorious Septime, Mr. Pepperin. Pepperin was amazed, grabbed the girl by his hand and ordered everyone to flee. After recovering, the guards understood their mistake and decided to catch up with the fugitives. Lola rushed after the hero but could not understand why they fled. Pepperon only asked if they found another way out when they escaped. Irie considered this proposal successful. It seems that the situation in the course has changed a little. Soon the guards felt the exhaustion. The invasion was too rapid so that they could handle it. Raging from the pursuit, the Pepperon group stopped. This city was no doubt. The hero was convinced that gnomes, elves, and wise demons could gather here. Aerie fully agreed with him. Usually the demons did not deny when they looked at them from the top, but they were simply ignored here. The Ruse ELN remembered how she attended the nuclei earlier, went there and bought something. Reprin was thinking about how the world of swords and magic came to life, and perhaps his rules could change just like that. Once in the game, even being part of a weak race, he never was left unaddressed. However, if all the less powerful peoples now ignore, trade will be impossible. The city played a key role in the acquisition of drawings for plantations, laboratories, and other structures necessary for the development of the base. They had to invent something urgently to get them. Pepperon clearly realized that their attitude had changed. Lala also noticed it, and now trade could be a real problem for them. Lal Loster Tempor put forward a proposal to simply conquer the city of the crust. However, Pepper and Erdrium were concerned about it was not the best idea. The hero remained one option, but he understood that it would not be easy to realize him. If she hides her tail well, ordinary people will not be able to recognize her. Irie noted that it was true. She could make a person from herself and buy everything he needed for them. The Elfian was convinced that the guard had already remembered her face, but Ray cunningly hid him behind the book, so everything was fine. In the event of failure, Pepron suggested to come up with another plan. First of all, when she entered the city, it was necessary to sell jewelry. They will need drawings for plantation, scientific center, beautiful home, and similar things. The guy also asked Eerie to collect as many books as possible that enhance agrarian and architectural skills, along with magic almanacs. It would be good to have a backpack to carry tools for construction and materials. Eerie asked what to do if she didn't have enough money for everything. In such a situation, Pepper and Aster advised her to choose the most necessary at her own discretion. Eerie hid her tail, lifted her suitcase, and placed it on her head. The girl went on the road to the city, and the hero wished her good luck. When Eerie entered the city, it seemed to her that the guards hesitated a little, but still did not obstruct. Well, if an ordinary girl carried the piggy bank effortlessly, it would be surprised. Pepin thought that Eerie would have to be entrusted in the near future. The skillful possession of magic masking was useful, but its level is the only third, so it is unlikely that such magic could be found in the city. Self has decided to clarify whether the hero really wants to take the core for future prospects. The hero was shocked by her sudden perseverance and tried to remember whether the Lala was always so warlike. It was significantly different from the character from the game, but it was not necessary to forget that this city was not independent. The Reeves was subordinated to the Linuxal state, so the heroes, having only initial magic, had a chance to win the whole country. Lala, biting the nail, resigned to the situation, but could not tolerate, as the guard costing Go Pit in the Caperin. She was simply torn from rage. Eerie took a little time to get back with buyers. She was a huge, crowded backpack, which was twice as much as her. The stones were very precious, so Eerie managed to buy everything you need. The man praised her for the perfect work. He was also interested in what changed in the town. The girl reported that at first glance everything looked the same as before, but she did not notice any of their 7 races. The choir was prevailed. Suddenly, Pepeperon had an idea. After all, it was not a game now, and the dependence on any of the races was no longer important. He still followed the established rules, but the situation required new approaches. Pepperon happily screamed to the girls that he had a wonderful idea. He suggested returning to the base, and Ari with Lala immediately agreed. After they brought all the things home, the characters gathered everything they needed. Seeing all the things that were collected by others, the swimming was amazed. How did you manage to collect so much in just a few hours? It was indeed an example of what true capable helpers should be. Harpia grabbed the belly, which was loudly groaned, making it clear that she had been hungry. Guy glanced at what they brought for lunch. It was difficult for him to believe that they brought a snake. The Fincy glowed with pride, happily stating that she made a lot of efforts to defeat it. The curious about the thought of her king, she wondered if she was so bold. The hero, doubt whether he can eat it, praised Harpy for her wit. Eerie thought as they would eat it. Gus suggested cut a large piece and fried. He also looked at the pack, asking who he coped with the first task. He could not understand why everyone around his sword was a tool. At first it was an axe, then a kitchen knife. Gus did not go. What is the matter? While they argued, Harpia stated that she could handle herself and collapsed 1,000 blows on a snake carcass. Endless blows simply rubbed the snake. When Harpia completed the work, she turned to others by thought. Nobo, taking one piece and smiling, said that this value is perfect for frying. Arius decided to light a fire, so now there was no problem with cooking. He thought that Phoenicis had gone crazy. He could not understand why she is this complex technique for simple snake cutting. A little more, and they could make her a company in a food bowl. Harpy laughed naught and apologized to him. Hungry Eerie and Finches could not understand why the meat was preparing for so long. Eerie decided that the time of lunch had come. Lala asked for permission to taste the dish first and bitten a piece. The taste just stunned it. Even without pickling, the amazing taste of a large snake is striking. The innumerable blows divided her jaw into pieces, but she still did not give up and resisted. Lala found a little strange, but it turned out that the meat was not poisonous, so it could be eaten without fear. The heroine considered this comment too modest, though she looked as if she had not tasted anything more delicious. Iraya was already enjoying a piece of meat and suggested that Peperon. Pepron agreed and began to chew. Surprisingly, he believed that the meat was delicious. When everyone was ate, the hero suggested to start the construction of the base, which everyone willingly agreed. Looking at the drawings, Paku suggested that he start with work on wood. If you need a saw, it was nearby. Pepper watched the work thoughtfully, thinking about erection of buildings. Earlier, when it was only a game, all the cases were decided by his subordinates. However, Lee smiled at Mr. Pepperon and offered to just relax, putting a chair in front of him. Pepperon agreed with her, although the situation was already real. All he had left is to sit and watch. Although this world now has become real, they did well without it. In the game, the boys skillfully built a frame and erected the house with one harmonized movement. It looked really impressive. Watching the indispensable pace of work of all around was somewhat disappointing. Pepperon felt inconvenience. Raising from the chair, he realized that it was not just a game, and he would also try himself in it. Running to the boys, he decided that now his help could be useful. However, the girls immediately refused him. Lal exclaimed that such small orders were not for Mr. Pepperon. Eerie fully supported her opinion, and the guy could not understand why it was so. Lala threw her head back and covered her face with her hand. She understood why the master was so kind and always tried to understand their feelings. But this did not bother them at all, because work on it brought unspeakable happiness. They were not frightened by any difficulties. Therefore, Eerie and Lala offered a Pepperon to sit down and relax, pointing to the chair. Pepperon hesitated, but eventually agreed. The girls were looking at the plan of the building, Kerosene scored nails, and Potsy and Nobo transferred large boards. Pepperon immersed in thoughts about hunting monsters and construction. It seemed that, unlike hunting for monsters, construction was considered a trifle, because he was constantly engaged in this in the game. The darkness was already prevailing, and their spacious home was fully built. The Pepperna group managed to build the whole house in just one day. Around the gardens, a well, and a warehouse. The guy was stunned. Despite the high level of skill and construction skills in the team, they completed work so incredibly quickly. When Harpia asked the owner what to do next, he replied that it was too late and suggested to continue tomorrow. Eerie thought that in the morning it would be necessary to take up the construction of the base. Pepperon added that you also need to start searching for new subordinates. Lala reflected the situation and realized that it would cause a lot of trouble. In addition, their initial level of development was quite low, and according to the rules of the group established by Gloria, only members of 7 unhappy races could join them. Peppering could not understand what Eerie meant when she said that only representatives of 7 unhappy races could join them. Even when it became reality, the restriction associated with races remained. Peppern had to lift this ban for their future. He sought to discuss this rule. Gus mentioned how the king helped them, those who were thrown away. The minimum they could do is follow the rules. Pav also did not want to see someone who did not belong to their race. Nobo agreed and noted that it could take a long time, but nothing could be done. He was stunned. What he had done for the sake of complicating the game has now become his cherished dream. I could not understand that he was going on in the heads of these people. After all, what they followed did not exist, and now it is not time to follow the rules. While Pepperon was nervously taping, Lala turned to him. At the same time, he could not admit that he was now ready to make friends with representatives of all races. After all, if they begin to rise, nothing good will work out of it. Finally, Pepperon exclaimed that it does not matter how much time it would take, because the glory of the country where 7 unhappy races lives. Pepperon finally made a decision, and the whole team rejoiced in it. Now a large house has become their shelter, where they continue to unite 7 unhappy races. At first they needed to increase the level of the base. The work was still plentiful, and the hero urged the boys not to relax. In general, Gus decided to set out their action plan. The current base, that is, their settlement, was at the first level. In terms of construction, the only problem arose with the number of houses. Lala was angry with what the kerosene explained everything by Mr. Pepperon. After all, the development of architecture, gardening, and searching for new partners have now been the most important tasks. The hero noticed that Eri looked quite strange, that the kerosene replied that she was in the morning. Pepperon also suggested that the rest of the team be determined by their roles. Several people have to go with him in search of news or allies, while others stay on the basis for order and safety. He proposed to divide into 2 groups. The laws noted that in this case, it did not mind to become a satellite of Mr. Pepperon. Finches also expressed her desire to accompany Mr. Pepperon, and he agreed. I and Nobos felt inconvenience in the presence of a distressed Lala. The department hoped that there was a different place, and the hero decided to ask who wanted to make him a company in this. All 3 guys turned away from Pepper. Nobo decided to deal with the issue of housing, and he began to protect the base. The kerosene followed them. Pepper addressed Leilai to join, and of course the girl agreed. Presenting attention, Nausea was watched by the crowd moving quickly in their direction, and everyone around could not stay back not to look back. Armed men who looked quite strong. The young man imagined that the bandits were in front of him, and he was convinced that it would not be difficult to drive them. However, when these men approached the heroes, the young man asked them to stop. He has won rivals in the game many times, but in reality, it felt quite different. Remembering the battle with Cyclops, he decided that everything was not so scary, because he already felt like a fight with the monster. One of the men with a bandage on the eye approached the boys, noting that they were new. His comrades shouted that they were only worthless fugitives who decided to establish their own settlement. The robber approached Pepperon and noted that he usually sells slavery. However, this time he decided to make an exception and suggested to pay him thousands of gold every week. It seemed to him a good deal. Pepperon ordered them to get away because he did not intend to spend their time on them. However, he stated that he would give the boy another chance. He put the sword on the hero, putting him an ultimatum to pay 1,000 gold or die every week. Hero Pepperon also decided to meet them and give another chance. The bandit broke down without realizing what this guy was talking about. He waved his sword and stated loudly that he would cut him into pieces, as he dreamed of Pepper. Without moving out of place, Pepin decided to thank. Huss struck a bandit for a dissecting blow that threw it back. Auguste saw that the bandit seemed to not even have time to say a word. All other bandits were amazed and disoriented without realizing what happened. The kerosene thought that he had killed him too quickly. But the hero replied that he did not intend to retreat forever, and to discuss anything else. With a look at a handful of pepper, he challenges the gangs, offering them to repel. Pazzi, Nobosia, and Fantasia immediately rushed into battle. The battle began, and Fantasia released its flow of destructive blades on one of the opponents. Meanwhile, Nobo with magic attacked several bandits at once, and with his huge sword cut off their heads. One of the bandits noted that these miners were incredibly strong, despite their worthless origin. The other, watching the fight, could not understand what was happening. They noticed the unarmed Lala, which seemed weak from the back, and decided to kill her. She was back from the back, shouting that she had to be cautious, calling her a long-haired one. But the girl did not move when the two pirates were struck by a cutting blow. Surprised, they have only noticed a magical circle on Earth. With her help, she summoned a saber, which they noticed too late. Although these races did not have great luck, they could master at least elementary magic. Lala grabbed his saber in her hands and turned to the enemies with a smile. Now that the enemy was left without weapons, it was already considered a threat, and somehow, a few robbers attacked the Elfian, shouting that with one of their pathetic saber, she will do nothing to them. The girl quickly performed a series of dance movements, and without much effort destroyed all enemies. Lola believed that it was just a group of fools who naively hoped to send their swords to Mr. Pepperon. Meanwhile, the hero watched all this from the outside. The spectacular spectacle unfolded in front of him, but he kept complete peace. It may be a merit of his cold-blooded skill. In the game, Magic and Sword, there was the ability called cold-bloodedness. The higher its level, the easier it was to fight. If this ability was low, and competing with a large number of enemies, he killed someone, covered his strange state, paralyzing the movements for a certain time, after which he, not of his own will, escaped from the enemy. However, the cold-blooded mastery of the Pepperon reached the highest 50th level. He remained unmoved even after the destruction of 300 enemies and did not receive any unusual conditions. Thanks to this ability, he could safely analyze the situation. Pepin hoped to maintain this balance in other similar circumstances. Reflecting on it, he noted the man with a bandage on his eye, which suddenly attracted his attention. He could not understand how such a backward race could be so strong, and he thought who they really were. Suddenly, inadvertently stepping on a stone, he attracted the attention of the hero who heard this sound behind himself. The man, covered with horror, fell to the ground, noticing how Pepperon pulled out his sword. The subordinates did not spare their forces, and the general only stood behind and watched the events. Pepin pulled the sword to the rabbit and asked if he had the last words. The thief in despair pleaded to wait and asked for help, but already too late. They unexpectedly hindered the obstacle, but had to return to the original design. Pepin reported Lolly and Finny that they would join him in search of amulets. Fina was delighted with this news. Nobo, Kerosene, and Packets asked Mr. Pepin to take care of himself what the hero promised to do it. Finazia caught up with Lala and Pepperon, asking them where they were heading. Lala explained that they were going to the village of Asheres. A few minutes before Mr. Pepperon's arrival and his satellites in the village of Escherov, there was an event. First, they were shouted, and then the order to sit down and be silent. The impression was that the elves were captured. One of the men asked a friend if they had already cleaned the whole village, to which he replied that they took away everything they could find. The Finnis almost cried, telling how difficult it is, but the hero reassured her, asking for a little patience. Lala carefully surveyed the terrain, and was convinced that the village should be here somewhere. She soon saw the entrance to the village in the distance and ran there. The girls rejoiced that they finally got and rushed to the gate. Pepperon smiled, though they only got at midnight. Finosia decided to congratulate the residents of the village of Ashers and wish them a good evening. However, when the characters came closer, a terrible picture appeared before their eyes. Everything was destroyed, and one of the people asked if all the ears managed to capture. The lizard-shaped beast assured that he saw someone in the next house. However, the three-headed Ibgragon advised him to stop unnecessary conversations. The man easily pushed one of the elves, demanding that they move out of place. Lala was stunned by how to treat the elves from the village. She recognized their representatives with VW. This abbreviation meant a black company. In the world of swords and magic, they were engaged in slave trade, drug selling, and prohibited magical books, murder, robbery, and abduction. It was the largest criminal organization on the planet. It is likely that they planned to sell the captive elves. Once upon a time, the hero himself was a member of this group and achieved considerable success. He acted cruelly and unfairly, considering it only a game, although even then felt the reproaches of conscience. He understood that contacting these guys meant to sign his own death sentence. It looked as if the action was not needed now, because their camp had not yet turned into a village. Although it was upset, because the elves will not be able to make subordinates. You will not do anything. Pepin decided to avoid unjustified risks, but Lala had a different opinion and ordered to stop immediately. She exclaimed that there was a majestic Lord Pepperon, who would never close her eyes to violence against 7 unhappy races, including elves. Pepperon did not want to allow this, but Fantasia also turned to robbers, supporting Lala. She was terrified of what happened to this village, because now it was impossible to eat there. The hero noted that Fantasia has completely different intentions. The robbers and noise did not have who shouted at them, the usual appearance of the elf, Harpia, and the gnome in the team. Pepin did not want to be noticed, but that happened. Blizzard grunted, asking if this gnome is really a hero. The other added that he had never heard of a hero with such a funny name. Lala was indignantly stated that it was an unprecedented boldness, and demanded to pick up their words back, otherwise they would pay for it. The three-haired man in the mask laughed and suggested that she taste their words. There was no more opportunity to avoid this battle, and Pepper sighed fatigue. If they deal with the opponents and leave no witnesses, everything should be in order. Pepper made a step forward and suggested that Finisia and Lally destroy enemies, preventing any of them escape. Finism and Lala immediately agreed with the task and began to prepare for battle. He decided that they should first gather an army capable of protecting the future state. 100 years of kobolds should handle it. Nobo, when making a sip from the mug, noted that the need for so many soldiers. They need not only the strengths, but also the wizards. He grabbed his sword, not shaking what he refers to Nobo. The kerosene, thinking about how much Eirik eats, asked her thought. Eerie, continuing to chew, replied that most likely the hint lies in the closest to their base of the village of Asher. After looking into each other, they decided that elves should now come. In the air, a strained silence hung, which suddenly broke only a sip of his glass. Everyone hoped that the elves would not be as scary as Lala. Meanwhile, shouts were constantly in the village. Looking at the spooky creatures, the robbers could not understand who they were. It seemed that they did not belong to unhappy races. Their incredible force dominated the bodies of enemies. These were real monsters. Pepin decided to entrust this pair to deal with the remains, while he planned to focus on the rescue of the elves. The rest of the team watched the prisoners, and one of them asked the partner if everyone was in place. The beast, like a rhino, agreed with him, but something suddenly attracted his attention. There was a noise at the entrance, and it seemed to the bandit that someone's shadow looks. Right in front of them became a low man. It was Pepperon, who finally found them. The bandits blocked him with blades, ordered to solidify on the spot. It was unclear that such an undersized stranger was doing here. Without paying attention to them, the young man took out his sword and instantly dissected the enemies, asking the elves whether they were fine with them. The elves were giving the hero's question, but Pepperon assured that he would explain everything later, and stressed that they needed to solve their ropes as soon as possible. At this point, when he believed that everything was under control, another enemy from the back was sneaky to him. Calling him a scoundrel, the robber swung his sword on the Pepperon. The Elfian shouted, calling the hero to be careful, but he reassured her, assuring that there was nothing to worry about. While the hero distracted the robber, the two girls creeped behind and suddenly attacked him. He did not even have time to notice how he turned. Finalia and Lala at the same time struck the attacker, forcing him to fall to the ground. The hero sincerely thanked the girls for his support. Lala was satisfied with herself and said they destroyed all the enemies of Mr. Pepperon. Finalia was immediately upset, feeling unbridled. The prisoner looked at Lala in surprise, noticing that she was the same as they were. Then the guy offered them to split and release all elves. While the prisoners were released, the hungry Finetsia was finally able to eat properly. She was so hungry that she ate with both hands, filling her mouth to the edges. The food was very important for her, but she did not want the elves to spend so many foods on them. But the elves saw it differently, because they saved them. The Lala with a gesture ordered Harpias to stop, noting that she accelerated. The elf could not imagine what could have happened to them, and thanked Pepperin sincerely. The hero, a little embarrassed, replied that it is normal. While he is alive, he will not allow such horrible events to repeat. This is, of course. The girl who called Lucy was the head of the village of Ashri. She asked the hero who he is. But before the guy had time to answer, he interrupted a female voice, saying that he was the same savior of 7 races. Lala, as always, solemnly presented the king of the glorious Loam and the greatest hero of the world. She asked for his love and compassion, but the hero believed that he had too many titles. Allah spoke about how they lost their country, but continued to reproduce it thanks to incredible talents. The first step was to attend this village in search of news and opportunities. In this light, all this became clear to Lucy. But this place was so small that it is difficult to call it a village. Lucy suggested that the heroes look at him. All residents of the village of Asher are under their care. Finetsia and Lala were amazed by such a proposal. He decided to clarify if she was sure that she was talking about all the villagers, and Lucy agreed. He first thought about several people, not everyone. The game never pointed to him the need to conquer so many people. About 60 elves lived in the village of Escher, and with so many settlements could rise to the level of the village, which would allow him to move to a new stage of development. Despite this, Lucy thought it could be a burden, but the hero assured that it was not. Their present settlement was at a distance, and it would be difficult to serve 2 settlements, so we will have to give up the current one. Pepperin asked the elves if they were ready for this step. Unfortunately, he commented that this no longer matters. This tree was so distant that they were difficult to find. That is why they avoided the attacks for so long. But other elves and unfortunate races have been severely attacked and became slaves one by one. Paul and Phonea boiled from rage, cursing this flock of bandits. The hero also acknowledged that those are real abomination. If other races hate them and become unfairly attacked, no one will come to the rescue. Even remaining in place, you can expect that the fraction will return, and it will end. Lucy wondered in Lala whether Pepperon was a savior of 7 races. At first she doubted that he could help the weak, such as they were. But Lala confirmed, assured that Pepperon is a majestic man. He was the only hope for them, those who were rejected. The people of elves were in the 7th heaven with happiness. Smiles shone on their faces. They looked at the hero, and did not get tired of repeating how incredible and how wonderful it was. Their reaction mirrored Lala's emotions. Lala also wanted to clarify that now they were no longer 7 unhappy races. They are the glorious Septum, the land of 7 first-class races. Lucy was delighted on behalf of Gloria and first-class races. Her eyes glittered. After bowing her knee, the girl turned to Mr. Pepin, asking him again as a village head. All the inhabitants of the village worshipped the girl following when she asked to take them under her leadership. All the peasants gladly perceived this decision and smiled, looking at Pepperon. He did not even imagine that finding subordinates would be so easy to attempt. At such a speed, his country will be rebuilt very quickly, even faster than in the game. Pepperin happily announced that from today they will all become members of Gloria Septum and his subordinates. Thus, under the guidance of Pepperny, now there are 62 elves who asked him to move on. It's just 2 days, and Pepron finally returned. His attention was immediately attracted by striking architectural masterpieces and state-of-the-art studies. The kerosene strictly stated that everything they had left was to wait for the king, and it would be exhausted on this issue. Looking at the composition, no one could understand who devoured all the supplies. Gas was horrified, because he could not understand how food stocks for 2 weeks suddenly had not been in 2 days. The king could return at any moment, and the situation looked deplorable. Potsy, tearing a piece of meat, asked Gas to keep calm and not panic. Eerie, chewing, also noted that it could be a test of his ability to remain cold-blooded. The kerosene grabbed a piece from the hands of a shack and angered that he had to use the mind, not eat all the stalks to the last crumb. Potzik decided to ask Arius if she knew some spells or scientific tricks to increase food stocks. Iraya replied that it is neither magic nor tricks. Meanwhile, Nobo approached Gas and noted that they had only 2 or 3 days left before the king's return. Somehow, it was necessary to get out, but Gas asked about his subordinates. Nobo decided that this could not worry about it, because if someone joins them, then the team will remain stable with 2 or 3 people at the present basic level. Titan believed that the king would forgive him, but the Lala would definitely come out of himself. Usually, such situations, according to Harry, is a common responsibility. She pumped, and Nobu asked her to silence. Suddenly the words of Pepeperon, who reported their reaction, were heard from the back. Nobo was glad, remembering the sun's ray, considering the pepper and the stab, as if the lightning seemed to be struck. Fanaza exhaled, tired, smiling. She was infinitely glad that they finally gathered together. Pepper and Apollyon returned home after a long separation. Seeing only 2 or 3 minor people, they were horrified. It is impossible to understand how this could happen, because there were more than 50. The hero was unclear that they were so scared. Then Gus was nervously explained that the cause in Pepperin, because he brought so many people. Pepperin replied that he was quite fortunate. 62 elves from the village of Pepples agreed to join them. Nobo praised Mr. Pepperin for his wonderful work, and Gus congratulated new residents. Lala suggested that something had happened during their absence, but Gus looked, assuring that it was not. Eerie approached the hero, holding a stack of books. She reported that all the studies she ordered were here, and that they have been successful. The hero praised Eerie for his excellent work, which was annoyed by Gas. Suddenly a piece appeared. Who caused his majesty? They were informed by the hero that in his absence of the villain did not appear. However, he remained ready to defend his country even at the cost of his own life. These thoughts did not constantly leave him. He emphasized again that everything was correct, and he also supported her opinion. The kerosene began to scold them, because they only brought positive news. Then the kerosene looked at the Nobo and realized that he should apologize to him. However, Nobo appeared to Mr. Pepperon to ask someone to help him with the buildings. The hero remembered it and thought it would be nice, because Nobo, apparently, was already on his feet. The kerosene looked at Nobo with fury, not finding words. Feeling joy, rushed to the composition in search of food, and kerosene felt a sudden cold on his back. He tried to stop her, offering first to pray, but Harpia wanted to have a snack at once. The kerosene was looking for new reasons for delay, indicating how much it was contaminated. The kerosene retreated when the heavy chest fell to his feet. The hero announced the group that they increased their level, and their settlement became a real village. It turned out that the system works in the same way as in the game. Finchea happily sat on the chest, scaring the Gassa. They could find plans to restore homes. The main residence is the first building. Having restored it, they could turn it into a village of the village, or the mayor. By turning the home into a majestic mansion, they will be able to attract the attention of travelers, among which may be future subordinates. Therefore, the Gloria will restore the former grandeur. Our hero is looking forward to when it finally happens. Lael suggested that everyone celebrate the meeting of new friends and renewal of the settlement. Everyone was in a sublime mood. But Pepperon noticed that the kerosene was nervous for some reason. The hero asked Lala and Fanny to hold the elves to their rooms, because 2 grueling days of the road were signs. He decided to postpone the feast for later. The girls listened to him immediately and went, leading the elves behind. The kerosene sighed lightly, but Pepperon approached him and asked what had happened. The kerosene thought out how to answer him sincerely. When he showed the hero composition and apologized for it, Pepin was amazed. They had no food. Arius and a pack were angry with Huss, reproaching him for excessive orders. Gus was indignant, suspecting that he was played. But the hero asked everyone to calm down and accept the situation as it is. In the end, they still have to look for food, otherwise everyone will not have enough. All three bowed to the hero, begging him to keep the secret from Lala. Pepin was amazed, because it seemed that they were more afraid of Lala than their own owner. Then Pepin wondered if he could. The kerosene was angry for the finality and the Araa, because they constantly misled and could never understand that they were thinking. However, the problem will be true only if you do not solve it on time. The hero moved in the direction of the village, confidently thinking that their path would be successful. However, Pepin completely forgot the important detail. He forgot about those who had to appear immediately after he heard about it. On the horizon appeared an army headed by a rider, which was informed that the majestic city of Septim had become a regular village. It has passed about a month since the hero was in the world of swords and magic. The girls congratulated him on a good morning, sprinkling with compliments and paying attention to his appearance. Their shack has now turned into a first-class home. In the game, he was in the seventh heaven with happiness when he received his first real home. However, there was still a lot of work, and the desire to relax under the tree periodically reminded themselves. Sometimes it took a solitary minute to think. It was difficult to relax when people were constantly around. Even the kings sometimes required loneliness. But as soon as he thought about it, as if frost had struck. Finally, the peasants found the king and informed him that something strange was happening on the border of the village, calling him there. Yaving from fatigue, the hero suggested that he was a bandit again. It was time that it was urgently building a wall, otherwise they will not be rest. Hearing the voices that demanded to call the chief here, the hero could not understand what was happening. Going closer, he saw a Caperon with sleepy eyes, who stated that he had arrived. But what he saw instantly removed from him all drowsiness and fatigue. A tall man with lats met Pachai and Lala with a harsh look. I assumed that they were from the Spaulding family, and asked what they needed from Mr. Peppering. He smiled and said to his guest that he actually only fell from himself. The warrior behind him burned from rage, and indignantly asked how they could deal with the Supreme Commander. But he waved, stating that he was indifferent. He was the commander of the order in the service of the Spaulding family, Lou Plastar. And he asked the heroes whether they realized whose land we're on. He said that these lands belonged to Maradi Spaulding, the head of the family. They could not equip the village here, so Liu ordered them to get out of here. The hero forgot about them, but everything was the way the commander-in-chief said. Their presence was probably about taxes. At the time, they were still a settlement. It was important. But the transformation into the village caused dissatisfaction. The Talshine Plain owners, from the Elves of the Azrad Empire, wanted to pay taxes. Otherwise, they were waiting for the war and the invasion of the numerous army, which threatened death. Pepper was aware that the Spawn family was famous for responsible taxpayers and should be followed by their example. In the game, the tax was 5% of the annual income. But before he managed to deny something, she shouted that they were indifferent to the Spawn family because they came from the adamant kingdom of the glorious Septim. To get rid of them, you will have to resort. These words really stunned the hero. It was something he was afraid above all, and he could not understand why they only aggravated the situation. It is necessary to continue the development of the village, otherwise everything will only become more difficult. The hero ordered the pack and Lolly to stop. After presenting Liu, he noted that he was the elder of the village, and apologized for the delay. At first, the general could not understand whether he was a gnome or a child, but the hero with confidence replied that he was a gnome. The general looked closely at the rest of the peasants. At first glance, the village seemed inhabited by elves, but with more detailed inspection, one could see giants, harpies, cobalt, demons, and about 70 different creatures. The general could not understand how they managed to collect so many dangerous creatures together. He was angry, but Pepperon asked him to calm down. The hero apologized before Liu and asked what they wanted from him. As previously noted, these lands belonged to the Sporting family, and they would have to leave. The hero asked to wait because he would not want to hear such a demand, and suggested to discuss the situation. The general hesitated. Then the hero noted that he had one proposal for them. This land was once deserted, and the creation of a village here to support the family of soldiers seems like a great idea. The general wondered if they were ready to oath allegiance to the family, and it was the proposal that the hero meant. The general thought and smiled, looking at the pepper. He ordered the soldier to bring a scroll, and he immediately executed the team, stretching the parchment. General Liu announced the beginning of negotiations, but Pepren asked to wait. He suggested moving the meeting to his residence, because the issue was important, and they had to discuss everything in a cozy atmosphere and calmly. The general agreed, and took 2 people, ordering the rest to stay still. The hero also asked the villagers to stay here, but Lala insisted with him, because 2 more went with the general. Pepperoni, without hesitation, immediately refused her. No one had to approach the residence during the negotiations. Pepperon asked to convey it to all those who are missing. Looking at Lala with gratitude, he noticed how her eyes shone. She gladly agreed to fulfill his request. Feeling relief, the hero thought heard. He understood that he should not be present in the negotiations in the role where he clearly lost. It was important to maintain the loyalty of their associates. When the heroes arrived in the residence, the general suggested that the negotiations began, because the only thing left to discuss is the amount of tax. Pepin still prefers to believe that it is only a game. All harvests of this village had to give 40% of the family who gave them fear. It protected the peasants from attacks and exile. At first, without understanding the subtleties of the deal, the guy agreed, but then asked to wait. Pepin was stunned by realizing these figures. 40% were too much. He could not understand where such generosity from tax collectors. Pepperrain begged to reduce taxes at least a little, but the general believed that only lower races in their village, which did not benefit in the war and could only be used only in agriculture. Peter was extremely dissatisfied with him, because their affairs went bad because of weakness. The hero wanted to say that they were recently attacked by bandits, and although they were weak, they could still repel. However, the general disagreed, believing that the Minoses would always remain weak and not suitable for battles. The hero began to lose patience, creaking his teeth. It seemed to him that the general had been too rapt and humiliated by Manas. He dreamed of destroying enemies with one powerful blow, demonstrating all his power. However, the guy mastered himself and gave up this thought. She reminded him of the plan. Meanwhile, the elfish girl sneezed, thinking that she probably became ill. It would be good if the hero had a reputation to prove his merits to the general. Pepperin replied that if there is an unresolved question in the breeding area, they would help him settle. Having solved the problem, they will reduce the tax rate. The general thought it could be a problem. The main problem was that WVS was a direct threat to the safety of their territory. It was likely that they had already arranged a safe shelter nearby, but Luce considered it unlikely that the problem could be solved. Pepper proposed to reduce their percentage if they determine the location of the enemy airbase and destroy it. The general laughed because he did not believe that it was possible. The hero asked to reduce the percentage to 10%, which stunned the general. If they destroyed the shelter, they would be forced to reduce it to 10%. In addition, such an action could lead to an open conflict with the Air Force. But they were ready to take the risk, so they rightly expected a certain reward. Pepperin turned to the general for advice, a little nervous. The general showed great interest and agreed with the proposal of the hero. Pepperin, feeling joy, wanted to verify again, to which the general answered in the affirmative. He gave them the month to accomplish the task, and in case of failure, the tax rate will increase to 50%, which simply struck the hero. If you act in half and only annoy them, they will start more attacks. And if you ask the weaker to deal with them, it is a greater threat to themselves. Therefore, the general decided to ask again. The hero suggested waiting and specifying whether they could help with something else. But the general replied that their problems are not so significant as to reduce the tax burden. The guy didn't know where to start. He thought that if he was able to solve some other problems that do not relate to the Air Force, it would reduce taxes. If you set deadline, you will have to act. But even if successful, they will get a low rate. It is not easy to destroy the BBC shelter. The general expected the answers from Pepperon, and he asked for a minute and promised to answer later after returning. However, the general opposed this and demanded the answer immediately. Keprin sighed hard. Taking the paper with the terms, he agreed with their proposals. The military wished the military and timely payment of taxes. They were looking forward to a report on the Air Force base. Completely exhausted, the hero fell on the bed, not imagining how to explain to everyone this senseless incident. All efforts are just to reduce the tax from 40% to 10%. According to Pepperins, others could think that he was a cheater. Elves from Arches have already been attacked by VVS. so the desire for revenge was quite likely. However, it looked like coercion, although it may have been an attempt to release 7 races from the WVS oppression. The hero and Lala at the same time breathed deeply. Eri sat next to Lala and asked what happened. Lala replied that nothing special, and then Eri was about to leave when LFUS suddenly grabbed her by the tail. Eri turned and asked, but according to Lala, she was already aware of everything. She sought to become more useful, but areas seemed to be in order. Lala was not satisfied with such an answer, repeating that all this is not so and cannot be normal. Earlier, after getting acquainted with this family, where many had rare hair, she tried to stay with one of the gentlemen, but he asked her to leave it for some time. She realized that Mr. Pepron had some problems and sincerely sought to help him, but felt a strong shame and disappointment. However, Eri did not think she was expected from her. It did not apply to her. Just around Pepin, someone always twisted. Eri was convinced that from time to time he just needed loneliness to think. In this case, it was not necessary to be so tense. If you need support, the Lord most likely will ask for her. Lala felt the joy of Iri's words. Lala shook Iri's hand, thanked, and promised to stop complaining and make every effort. Iria waved farewell and thought that Lali would not hurt a little more restraint. Returning to the village in a hurry, Lala thought about the hero and mentally promised to serve him constantly. Suddenly, Lala heard it called Lucy, and immediately suspected it was not good. Lucy confirmed that the things were bad, remembering something about her sister. After her breathing, she was finally able to inform Lolly that her little sister had been abducted by the air army. Lucy was confused, did not know what to do, and decided to tell everything Mr. Pepin. However, Lala asked her to calm down because the king is now busy. Lala suggested talking to Lord personally. Lucy remembered that this morning, the Reese and his friends went to play the forest. Walking in the forest they felt too far away, and it could be dangerous. However, he reassured, assuring that everything was fine because the sister gave them permission. The elf that accompanied it was afraid that monsters could be in this forest. However, Reese assured him that there were no dangerous creatures in these places, so everything would be safe. There were colorful rabbits that were very rare creatures. She imagined Pepin is happy if they bring one of them home. Getting out of the bush, the girl asked them to look forward. The same cute rabbit sat right in front of them. The children decided that he was too sweet to miss the opportunity, and decided to catch him. Reese assured that she could handle herself. She sat down to be on a level with a rabbit and called it to herself. The rabbit noticed the girl, came closer, and carefully began to sniff her hand. Reese said he reassured to him so that he would not be afraid. Taking a rabbit in his arms, he slightly rubbed his nose against her cheek, holding back laughter from tickling. They seemed to have managed to make it with this fluffy baby. Other children were delighted and also wanted to hug Furry. Noticing another nearby, Reese looked around. But they were not lucky to come across a VWS gang. The leader, with a bandage on the eye, brutally suppressed the rabbit and asked the little elves what they were doing in this place. The children were frightened without realizing where the BBC group came from. One of the bandits decided that such young captives would be great slaves. Another agreed, because they were waiting for many lessons and trials. She firmly stated that she would handle herself, and ordered others to return to the village to inform the ruler and the rest. However, the children refused to obey, because they realized that it was not possible for her. The girl turned to them and shouted so that they would run faster. The children obediently conquered and promised to find help. One of the group strongly ordered the other not to let the enemies escape, and the girl, without delaying, grabbed the knife, trying to hold back the trembling in her hands. The robber laughed and told her not to be afraid, because he called the place where they went with her. He called a true paradise. From this place Gru stopped. Only her knife remained on the ground. Lala asked if it was the Air Force, but the children firmly assured that yes. They wore the same uniforms as the attackers on the Ash. Nobo was afraid that if it was, their business was collapsing. They can sell it into slavery or make it work to death. Lucy was shocked by these words and begged Lala to save her sister. Lala, without hesitation, agreed and stated that they were going to the rescue of the Reese. But he asked them to wait, because you need to announce the Pepperon of their ideas. Lala firmly believed that he would support them, while Hus had doubts. Mr. Pepperon once noted that the Air Force is not the most pleasant company, and one thing to fight the owners of slaves in their territory, and quite another, to strive into their great. He decided to find out what Mr. Pepperon would say about it. Lucy was hard to imagine what could happen to the red-eyed in such a situation. The kerosene believed that Mr. Pepperon would undoubtedly help them. Lala agreed, though he think that the Lord really thinks seemed to her nonsense. Gus insisted on his return to the village for help, and all supported it. Lucy, holding a knife of rice, wept, remembering Mr. Pepperon. Her thoughts were circling around her sister, where she kept hope for the better. Pepperon took a pencil and suggested that he save his younger brothers from the majestic septum and win the VVS hide. In his room, where the papers were lying everywhere, he laid out a plan. However, he decided that this would not work, because it turned out to be imperfect. Throwing another leaflet, the hero decided to destroy their capistas, that is, secret hiding places. Parking himself, Pepin could not come up with something better. He believed that there should be a special word that would make him look like a Lou. He decided that he had to just say that they would destroy the WWE shelter. Imaging himself as Lala, he asked why they did it. Again entering the role, he replied that there were no reasons, but they would still do it. When Pepperon embodied his scenes, he noticed noise from the outside. Looking out the window, he decided to find out why there is so humming. He was amazed, seeing a whole crowd of residents under his home. Lala returned to Mr. Pepperon, realizing that he was busy, but despite this, she sought to discuss an important business with him. At this point, the hero remembered information about the tax system and felt horror. Otherwise, it was difficult for him to understand why they gathered here for conversation. He heard anger in their voices and felt anxiety. He decided that in this case he was not going to exercise caution. Moreover, he planned to take advantage of royal privileges, ordering them to destroy the BBC or whatever. Going to the crowd, he announced that he was a Pepperon, the king of the famous septum, and if he said so, he would do it. People were surprised and distrustful for the hero. He wanted to tell the Lord about everything, but Pepperon invited everyone to hearing. He shouted that the glorious septum plans to invade the VVS imitation, because they themselves realized what it was needed. He raised his hands up and proclaimed that they would fight for their future. Then he ordered everyone to prepare for the war. An awkward silence reigned, and the Pepperon suggested that they could not like it. But he was convinced that they would not regret their choice. Lucy, with tears in her eyes, remembered that, apparently, Pepin himself already learned about everything. Without realizing what is happening, the guy froze in place. Lucy approached him, took his hands, and thanked twice sincerely. The crowd shouted that Pepperon was their king and savior, urging him to go forward. Lala told Pepperon that he was right, and that they should start preparing for the war immediately. They have to save the stolen paradise. And the hero only now learned about it. Rice was a sister of Lucy, a former leader of Ashiv years. In his memory, she always remained a friendly Elfian. There were even times when they played with her. According to the hero, the VVs sought revenge for events in the village of Ashirs, wishing to destroy Os. They got rid of all the traces, so no one would ever know that they were their hands on the right. But Pepperon could safely claim that such actions were very appropriate. He believed that this would not have to explain anything, and his popularity would certainly increase. Papin decided that they would save the cut and destroy the airbase. The hero urged everyone to take up the plan. He asked Lala and others to go to their place of residence. Within the Lamoting of the territory of the Empire Eliphazard, there was a special place. He lay unconscious on the floor and just started to come. She opened her eyes and got up, feeling every part of the body hurts. Memories of beating by those guys from the Air Force were again floated in her memory. Being behind the lattice, the girl did not even realize where she was. Suddenly, behind the girl came a voice that greeted her on the awakening. The dark silhouette immediately looked at him, that again the elf, and upset that this time they had not brought someone from a better race. Reese asked the mysterious man where they were, and he replied that they were in the BBC shelter. He suggested that the girl was also abducted. Reese confirmed his words and said that her village had been attacked and her force was dragged here. The silhouette stood up and, answering, noted that all present here were actually dead. The owners of the V-dinners did not give any rest, forcing them to work for exhaustion. Once in here, it was possible to forget about the outside world. The girl approached the frightened Reese and greeted her in hell. Despair immediately flooded the heart of Reyes. Reese said a prisoner that she needed to get out of here, but the girl just laughed. She did not understand how the Rice could be so naive to want to escape, and advised to pay attention to the chains on her feet that were not just that. She dared to ask the girl who she was, but insisted that she first name her name. The Elfian reluctantly reported that her name is Hel, to which the girl replied that her name is Mr. The gentleman belonged to a less respected gnome. The gentleman sat on the stone, believing that one must first calm down. Soon, she will have to work so exhausting that the effort and time to experience will not remain. Reese stunned what she was forced to do. It turned out that they were in a mine where VVS captured people and forced them to work for free. Mr. wondered if the rust was famous for the explosive rock, but the girl had no idea. It was a stone that exploded with heavy perturbation, so it was often used in weapons. It was considered a dangerous mineral, so only a few people in Spalting had the right to produce it. But VVS did not pay attention to it. Slaves were easy to replace, and here they died from explosions or exhaustion. But even before his death, even friends. Now it's time to summarize the results of everything that was discussed. The hero was thinking about the plan with his group. He suggested that Fanus and Pachi would take care of the entrance. They needed to get to the alarm and turn it off if it turned out. He assured that he would make every effort and take on all the burden of work. They discussed the northern entrance to the Air Force repository, where their group had to go. When the guards inside the storage are neutralized, the Kerosene, Gala, and Eri must be struck through the eastern entrance. Their mission is to save the cut and destroy the shelter. Mr. Pepperna agreed with the plan. The elves had to protect the base in the morning. Noble regretted that he could not join them, but assured that he would do his best to keep their home safe. Gus apologized to Lord and had an important question. The main purpose of their mission was Rias. He could not understand why after the task could not simply leave the shelter without destroying it. Pepron suggested that he did not understand what Gus hinted at, but she was in rage. For her, these creatures were the monsters that destroyed their village. You can't just ease the reality and forget it all. It's a war, and if you decide to fight them... Looking at the heroes, Pepin mentally apologized to the Kerosene. If it were not for tax rates, he would support him. Meanwhile, Lala raised Gas's hand and announced that they would destroy the BBC shelter. If everyone is ready, it was possible to start safely. The gates of the dungeon dissolved, and the memorial reminded that time to take up work. The man pushed her, and the girl fell on the floor. He strictly ordered her to rise quickly and act without delay. By ordering her to move forward, he realized that only the weak races that were stolen gathered in this place. The girl looked around, but could not find the gentleman. Then the man asked permission to go forward. One of the men did not understand why the girl did nothing and ordered her to work. But Reese replied that she did not know where to start because she is new. It was the leader of the group, the Finger. He said she should be watching others and learning, because any mistake can cost her life. The girl pushed her cheeks and thought, why not pay more attention to training in this case? Looking closely at others, she did not know what to assume from it. Her task was to look for light. In any case, she had to try. Taking a pick in her hand, she decided to stay away from the light red areas. As soon as she started working, as there was an explosion behind, she turned and saw in front of her a torn body of the slave. The gang member ordered not to hide him, because it did not make sense. They decided to simply throw the body by monsters outside. Tears flowed on the face. It is better to die from exhaustion. But the death of a bomb was inevitable. The girl could not stand and asked irritatedly to the crowd that they did not return to her with indifference. The cut wondered if they knew what life was, because she could not understand how to treat a living creature like garbage. They answered her that living beings were just tools, simple tools, nothing complicated. They cannot even be sold, and it was considered only a departure. Perse believed that they did not deserve to live, and ordered her to continue their work. The restorer considered it rude and exclaimed that they were not just tools. They were not born to be used by scums like these. Feezer reached out to the ride's head, saying that she was too stubborn. It seemed to him that it had to be taught. But suddenly a female voice was heard behind, which called Lord to stop. It was a master who decided to explain all the Reese. Percy turned to the gnome who had already had time to get him. He said he likes when students are able to deal with tasks. Mr. only wanted to clarify the cut of the situation. Then Percy instructed her to explain everything. The master thanked the leader happily for his trust. Taking the girl by her hand, the master pulled her behind. The cut asked her girlfriend what was going on, but she decisively ordered her to silence and follow. They came to the door, before which the master asked the cut to enter. Entering inside, the cut instantly faced a spooky torture room full of various tools. The cut was stunned, only now realizing where it was. She turned to the Apant with indignation, asking what she was doing here. Apana decided that she would not let her go until she made sure that the cut is just a working tool. The girl begged not to be senseless, assuring that she was not an instrument. However, there was a choice. To stay here, tolerance of endless torment, or to lie, recognizing herself with a tool. The gentleman was not a fan of torture. But if the Riaz had to withstand them, you would not do anything here. Riaz could not allow her to be called, and the master tried to cheer her up, calling to look at the situation with optimism. It should be emphasized that she could not change the situation. It was impossible to defeat everyone and bring them out. Nice disagreed with the master, because she was sure that working together, they would be able to do it. However, the master stood on her, jokingly touched the girl to her nose. They had a choice, to obey and live on, or to choose death at the same moment. The girl tilted her head in agreement, because she realized that she was only a labor force for them. She decided to accept this reality. The lady smiled and noted that it was a wise decision. She gladly stated Mr. Resta, who made conclusions from the lesson. The leader was embarrassed by the girl's too cheerful mood. The gentleman replied that they were really in good humor, and that the nerves did not withstand when she saw the camera. She decided to look in front of the RI, as if she were pleased to forgive her, and emphasized that she would make every effort. In addition, she agreed to obey any orders that she would give her. The finger laughed, considering Rice a coward. In this case, the Paris decided to ask the girl who she is. Having mastered herself, Rice touched her knees and confessed that she considered herself only an instrument. Perse considered it a great solution and ordered her to quickly take up the case, following his instructions with honor. While Rijaz was crying, Percy ordered the gentleman to follow him, which the girl, smiling, willingly agreed. Returning for the lattice, the lady reached vigorously. She confessed that she was tired, but the day was successful and she was satisfied. She also expressed his hope that Rijaz had learned all the lessons, with which the elves had to agree. The master put bread before growing up, and the girl looked at her in surprise. Perse presented something for the lady, but she decided to share with Ris, because they were neighbors. Growing was indifferent. She didn't expect anything from him. But the lady tried. She was indifferent who gave it. It just was bread. Reese thought why the master agreed to teach her, believing that she wanted to help. The lady only laughed in response to her assumption, and the girl looked at her with interest. Donna did not understand why she to do it. She just flirted with the Trigon, but did not understand what she meant. This was the refuge, and if he was in a good mood, he could free her from slave labor, which was limited to the cleaning and distribution of food. If you behaved the best, it was possible to become an official member of the Air Force. Elphys was amazed by learning that the master sought to join the ranks of these monsters. The master did not understand what was wrong, and asked the RI whether she would also like to enter. Of course, Reese did not want to be among those who perceive people as things. According to the gentleman, while continuing work in the mine, they were at risk of exploding or die from exhaustion. She was amazed by the fact that Reese believed that the maiden had no pride. The lady froze, remembering his words that they are only ordinary slaves, and that their fate is to work. The dwarves were proud, believing that it would avoid the consequences. However, the finger decided that from now on, their fate would be death. The dwarves, which were then near the maid and were desperately defended, were destroyed by the ring. Pontus smiled and noted that this approach would not provide them with survival. The Elfian sighed sadly, noting that she did not look like Mr. Pepperon, although he was also a gnome. The girl did not understand who he was talking about. Ponce specified that he was gnome, confirming it again. She was convinced that Mr. Pepperon would certainly come to the rescue and destroy them all. The gentleman turned away from the cut and lay rest. She did not understand why gnome suddenly found herself here. Reese could not allow her to mock Mr. Pepperon, but Mr. knew the weakness of the gnome better. Like a weak race, they had to be as smart as it was to survive. The cut exclaimed that the Pepper herself was extremely strong, and the master decided not to argue with her. Standing on the street at night, Lolly seemed that something was wrong with Mr. Pepperon. The hero confessed that he really became cool. However, they had already reached VVS Egypt, and Mr. Pepperon ordered them to move forward. 2 days have passed since the beginning of Pepperon's mission and his teams. Lala asked the hero how much time they would need to get to the storage facility. However, the hero suggested that they should already be very close. They hoped that all was okay. In this case, they had to identify the main with the help of playing in stone, scissors, paper. He reacted to Fanaji's proposal, calling it nonsense, and confidently stated that he was no doubt that he was the team captain. The Finnis and the pack were arguing. He could not agree that the Finnis could manage it, but she had a different opinion. After all, the Finnis has destroyed the last shelter. Lala, having lost patience, cried that they should focus on the cut. not on this senseless. An hour before Pepperon arrived at the Air Force repository, Reese began to think about how long she could stand it, closing her eyes. She dreamed of returning to her friends as soon as possible. Starting from the second day, Reese had to join the extraction. The work was incredibly difficult and long-lasting, and the constant fear of detating at any moment depleted it not only physically but also morally. The master was sitting in the corner, saying that time was exhausted, but LFESD could not understand what she was. She was waiting for this moment for so long, but the Reese could still not understand what the master was saying. There was a click that was shot. Mr. firmly stated that she would finally run away from this place tonight. She demonstrated cutting of keys that opens her camera and removes shackles. The cut was stunned without understanding where these keys came from. The girl confessed that she stole them from the finger, had to strain a lot, but everything succeeded. Riza believed that the gentleman seeking to obey the Air Force and be with them. However, of course, she just pretended. Usually she showed humility, began to feel sympathy for them, and in the end, they allowed her to move freely with them all over the storage. She was also told all internal secrets, so the master perceived it as their farewell evening. Mr. asked Rizu if she would not take it with her, but Rizu decided that he was already exhausted and not to pull her force. But the cut did not agree with it. She is not so tired that she could not move. Unlike the maiden, she was able to own a sword. If you have to fight, it will be able to use it. The lady believed that it was a bold statement for the one who was captured and imprisoned in the dungeon. But if the Rolls had the keys to the shackles, the lady does not mind taking the cut with him. While Riza tried to open a castle on shackles, she decided to find out about their plan. If they intended to escape, they need a clear plan. The master noted that it was necessary to go to the registration room first. But Rijaz did not understand her plan. The Gallium guards patrolled the perimeter of the base, and in case of detection, they would be doomed. But if they managed to get to the registration room and register as members of the Air Force, no one would have touched them. Every night after the break, when Purs and others relax in the control room with booze, the security also loses vigilance. If the girls were able to cut the golem, everything would be decided. Reyes did not understand. If the lady knows so much, why did she hesitate so much with the escape? She may have just wanted to escape with her friend, but the lady could not understand what she was grinding, assuring that she didn't want it. She was about to knock from here, but she could not leave her sister for lately, and had to agree to take her with her. The cut laughed, believing that the lady is lonely. Why she denied. She threatened to bake her girlfriend again if she stopped caressing her. The girl smiled and apologized. In this case, she proposed to go to the registration room faster. The elf, full of determination, knew where to go, and the master completely agreed with her. She claimed that the goal remained quite near. On the way, they heard the steps of Galulam, and the ponder immediately recognized them. Hiding around the corner of the house, the girl noticed that he was moving right to them. Fear engulfed them, and they asked what to do, because they could find them. The master shed this whole situation. Hearing the sounds in the dark, he decided to find out what was happening, and moved the other way. She sat down, breathing hard, realized that the danger was close. Fortunately, they managed to come across an empty room on time and in the right place. They decided to stay here for a while when the sound suddenly caught their attention. These gallets were much more dangerous than the master could imagine. With such speed, the morning will come before they reach their destination. She decided to move better to the registration room. Reese froze in place and called a lady who asked Elphys to keep her thoughts with him. Right in front of them sat a huge figure of a man with a katane in his hand. The girls froze in horror. Meanwhile, Peprin's team approached the northern entrance to the Air Force. There, they were divided into two groups according to the preliminary plan. In a minute, packets and money were to come inside. As soon as the alarm signal, Peprin with others follow the following. Phenocia and a pack were adopted by Lord's orders. Lala hoped for both of them, and Phoenicia asked to trust her. Before going inside, the money wanted to make sure that it was a real Lala, but Patsy refused to play with her in a plaster-tapping stone. Phenocia came to the conclusion that she was afraid to lose her in such a simple game, that he had a great deal. Therefore, he suggested that the one who first wins 3 times will have the right to control this time. He promised not the word not to touch the topic, and Phenocia accepted the challenge. Lauren and his team were near the eastern entrance to the BBC shelter. Pepin asked Gas to open the door, and he immediately took up the work. As soon as they came from Ari, They went to the slave cameras to release the Reese. When it is safe, they will go to the registration room to disable the security system. Lala was already alert. Now they only have to make sure that no one would notice them, and then everything would be perfect. There was a clear picture in Pepperon's head, the same camera where Vishibailo was located. It is called Triad's Tire. It was where the girls went there. Having mastered themselves, they tried to leave the room as quietly as possible not to disturb him. The responsibility for closing the door switched to the gentleman, because she said that the room was empty. The master apologized to explaining that she did not know that she was a room of the tire. It was dangerous to stay here. They needed to get out faster, because if he finds them, everything is over. Meanwhile, the master noticed how the cockroach crawls into them. "Not standing," she shouted. But Reese had time to cover her mouth with her hand, persuading to calm down and assured that it was just a cockroach. Suddenly, loud sounds and humid noise attracted the attention of the heads and frightened the girls. A dark silhouette with demonic black eyes emerged right in front of them. Shin directed an angry look at the prisoners. Hugging, the girls realized that they were now in the mess, because the Pepper Perrin group entered through the eastern entrance, and anxiety came. They agreed that he had done well with the task, and the hero decided to act faster in this situation. The alarm has attracted the attention of the hay, and it turned sharply. The girls could not even be moved from the place. Securite mutilated something about a sign of advantage and headed in the opposite direction. It seemed to be saved. At the northern entrance to the Air Force warehouse, Pakai and Phenocia played in stone, scissors, paper. Phenocia was delighted with its victory and the role of the captain. She reassured Paka, explaining that it was only a temporary change. She noted that he was a real captain of the glorious septum. She looked at the subordinates and ordered to move on. Even then, he began to regret it. She pointed her finger forward when the alarm suddenly sounded. No one could understand why he turned on, because they had not yet found anyone. Venezia suggested that Pepperon had slid with others much earlier, as they mentioned that they should only enter after alarm. So there was no point in staying here. It was necessary to go inside. Thanya went to the shelter. They barely came inside as the enemy came to meet them. He apparently considered Pachai and Finis his rabbi fugitives, and asked what they were doing here. He wrapped herself, called the enemy a fool, and asked Finis not to stop. He announced the hunt for Asen, and the enemy only smiled, not realizing who was talking about. Venezia gave her cheeks, thinking that it is unfair, because it does not feel like a captain at all. Anasia stressed loudly that she was the captain here, and the task of the captain is to track the enemy. I replied that such cases were better entrusted with his subordinates. The captain does not make sense to spend time on some slight scum, and Fenai agreed with this decision. Then she decided that as a captain, the first would enter the repository. Leaving the enemy for a pack, Fenai immediately rushed inside. The VVS gang was exclaiming that the boys and noise did not have that they got into. He could not just let down the finished and shouted that she would not be able to go without a fight. However, Fina was easily jumping through him, and pacified the enemy's blow with his sword. Fincy asked Pachai what to do in such a situation and how to penetrate her. However, he did not know the answer and just said she was going. Fincia rushed to flee, and the enemy looked at her wisely. He noted that they had only harpy and slaves who died, so newcomers could become their new prisoners. However, the pack and others had only one real chief, Mr. Pepperon, and they were ready to obey him. The opponent replied that kobolds are just a flock of Lazars. Pota noted earlier that he had already declared hunting for him, but the enemy suggested to start hunting for frogs. Paka clenched the sword even more and intervened in the conversation. Raging at the enemy, he exclaimed that he did not need it. Meanwhile, the little captives continued to flee further and further, not understanding why it is here. Shin seems to be inadvertently allowed them to escape. However, this guy did not serve in the air forces. He is only throwing in psychopath warriors that appeared here only for the fight against benefactors. Judging by the way he rushed there, it seems that another uninvited guest appeared or someone. Reese was immediately suspected that it could be Mr. Pepperon and their friends. The lady was surprised at the girl who talked about it again. Although she did not know what King Mr. Pepperon was, she was convinced that there was no grounds for his visit. Rijaz attacked with anger when the maiden began to catch from Mr. Pepperon again. The master did not pay attention to Rijaz because there were very little left to the registration room. She proposed to complete the dispute before they found them a goal, otherwise they would have a suite. The team, which included Pepperon, Lala, Gala, and Eerie, went further. The slave dungeon was located only a little further along the corridor. The roads were led there. Pepron believed that they almost reached the goal, because the dungeon was about the corner. The guy realized that if it really is the same as the rubber, then he is somewhere in this hall. Suddenly stopping, Pepin ordered everyone to solidify on the spot. The fraudulent signs were ahead, so Pepin pulled the sword. Shen was already rushing to the enemy, exposing his katana for blow. The first blow had to kiss in his back, but Pepperon had time to repel it. Lala was worried about the Pepperon inside, but the guy replied that he could cope on his own and ordered 3 friends to get to the allotted place. Lala and the rest agreed, asking the hero to take care of himself. Shingen could not even imagine that someone would be able to stop it from the attack from the back. However, this technique was well known and was used repeatedly, so it was already accustomed to it. The tire was sure that he would never forget a meeting with an opponent who could compare him by force. The hero has never seen such, even in the most severe battles. Although they existed in the world, they still have not encountered even during game days. After these words, Pepin swung and hit the guard who was not ready for such events. Pepin confessed that he had already participated in more than 100 battles, which was pleasantly surprised by the hay. He became much more interesting, and noted that the hero is the strongest opponent for a long time. The enemy applied the improvement that gave him some extra hands. Pepin was surprised that Shin wanted to try this technique. Armed with numerous kathanes, the enemy used Karani technique, known as the Mystery of 6 Swords. The deadly blades were rushed simply on the hero. A powerful attack had a 40% chance to hit the target if the damage caused exceeded a certain limit. It was almost impossible to avoid it. In case of hit, the attack would absorb health, approaching the defeat. But there was only one way to victory against such power. The tire considered an attempt to use a storm with nonsense. Only ice magic would not be enough to stop it. However, the attack succeeded, and Shin was injured. Pepin explained that the first to hit and make the opponent bleed is an effective strategy using ice magic. He reached this conclusion after about 50 fights. Raising the sword to the throat of the guard, Pepperin solemnly announced the completion of their game. The hay with Uchmilka praised the hero, deciding that it was time to bring the risk under it. Meanwhile, Panoma and Riaz have already arrived in the registration room. Standing in front of the door, the opponent thought they had time to come and slightly opened them. He sat directly in front of them and was clearly waiting for their arrival. He arrived here at night to figure out what was the fuss, and it turned out that it concerns them. The lady was stunned, seeing the leader. Anna asked the leader with fear what he was doing here. It seemed in a hurry with them an evil joke. She sought to remind her that she meant. Her scattering tail was only a resistance, part of the cunning plan. Ms. Kirsten realized that the wallet knew everything about her plans. The gentleman shouted to the gentleman who turned to see the monster. The master was angry with everyone because they reached this moment. He approached the gentleman and put her hand on her head. He became bad from the thought that some slave was trying to surpass him. Blossom, calling Mr. Stupid. Tilting his head, he hit the girl with his knee into his stomach. Reese called a gentleman who twisted in pain. Leaving the lady alone, the Feathers headed to Riaz, calling her rotten elf. He intended to kill them both in one go. Suddenly, the wallet with a cold jumped, moving his attention to her. She told him that it was a mistake to leave the stones she kept in this room. The master ordered him to move, otherwise she would blow them up. The Feathers were shaded by fear, because if she had undermined them, she would have died with him. However, she decided that it was better to leave his life near him than to be a victim of his actions. Calling her for courage, he asked if she could dare to decide. The master answered the curses in the ancient language, assuring him that she would inevitably blow them up both. He shouted at the gentleman to stop, but her girlfriend would apologize. She pulled the cut into this mess, but it was the only way to see each other on the other side again. She put a stone flying down. However, the Lord was strange when the stone just fell and rolled on the ground. The Piss was stunned because he expected the stone to explode, and the lady could not understand what was happening. Purst laughed when he realized that the master thought seriously that they had not taken any protective measures while being among the explosive stones. Showing the ring on his hand, he explained that it was their insurance. It was this finger that allowed all the explosive stones within a radius of 5 meters around. Only the leader of the organization had the right to own such force. While he wore him, he had nothing to fear. This artifact could also activate an explosion with a small charge, such as in the explosive stone held by a lady. Demonstration of the middle finger on which the ring was called caused the explosion of the stone in the hands of the maiden. Perse smiled when the master fell on his knees. Although the situation was far from pleasant, he made sure that her hand would not suffer. Toretti watched all this anxiously. The finger was not those who always trust others undoubtedly, but it was he who trusted her in half. She betrayed his trust and asked not to think that she would just die. Meanwhile, Pepperon was holding a sword near his enemy's throat. The tire smiled, but felt something wrong. Pepperon thought that if the game was killing it, the main one in the base would destroy them all. But he wondered, what happens if he decides to save his life to the enemy? Carefully thinking about all possible variants of events, he realized, in 9 out of 10 cases, everything goes wrong. He hesitated whether the method of attempts and errors to act, because the situation was different from previous games. It has been a lot of time since the hero tried to conquer the game. And with these words he just went on, leaving the tire in surprise. The tire thought whether or not to attack the back to find out what his opponent was busy. Pepperon noted that he intends to do something, and is not going to interfere with him. In an hour the ice had to melt, then he could embody everything he intended. Remembering something important, the hero looked at the surprised Vishabal. He thought about it during the game, but suddenly the tire appeared, and the hero's heart squeezed. Pepperon asked the enemy to attack his front as always. The guy waved farewell and the tire smiled, noticing that the gnome was comforted. The hero rushed forward, hoping to escape from the captivity of the slaves and to go to the registration office on his own, leaving his comrades behind. Meanwhile, Venetia hurried forward, not understanding why there was no enemy here. When she quickly overtook the turn, she suddenly stopped, deciding to see what was hiding there.
The prisons were filled with slaves. She guessed that somewhere there was a metaned.
The prisoners noticed inside the scary shadow that hung over them. However, Venetia, breaking the grates, asked if there were Reese. The girl from the goblin's race was surprised to look at Venetia, because she decided to introduce herself as Captain Gloria Septim. She asked the captive, or was familiar with a girl named Reis. The girl answered Harpius that Reis was not closed in this dungeon. So Venetia asked her to hold it to that place. But only then did you mention that the dungeons needed the key, and wondered where to get it. Harpius smiled, promised to help the branches, and suddenly rushed, leaving the girls in guessing. Venetia shouted when she realized that she was not able to overcome the path without a key. Perse decided to finally break the relationship with the lady. Raya begged for forgiveness, but the leader replied that he would choose another elf in the satellites. He lifted his hand to the gentleman, and Rie shouted the name Pepin herself. Suddenly, the explosion occurred, and Pepperin stopped the lady from the enemy strike at a moment. At first, it was difficult for the first to understand what happened, and the master looked at her rescue. Reese was relieved to Pepperon herself, who was glad that everything was fine with her. He apologized for taking so much time to get here. Pepperon stared in the lady, another representative of the dwarves. He has not met such as her for a long time, and, to his surprise, the lady was also pleased to know that he was the same Pepperon she remembered. The master looked closely at the finger. I am sure that he was on a platoon. The finger could not understand where Pepperon came from, his name, and who he was at all. The hero introduced himself as a Septim, the servant of King Gloria, and called his name. He could not forgive for interfering with his friends and people. At first, he thought that the king of the asshole state could want from the Air Force leader. The hero replied that he arrived to save his subject named Ries, as well as destroy the finger and release all captured enemies. He became angry and said managed that he could only dream of such things. But before the flower managed to attack the hero, Pepin instantly compartment for his right hand, which stunned everyone around. Screaming with pain and squeezing his hand, he initially fell to his knees. The hero believed that such pain would soon pass, as in his slaves. From the rage and hatred of the vein at the head of the ring, reminiscent of the shadow of all-consuming spring, he had to pay his life for the suffering he caused Rias and his family. Raya ran to Pepperin and asked him to stop. He really treated everyone as objects, and in her eyes people fell from his cruelty. He did not know the limits in his ruthlessness. Therefore, if Pepper just killed him, it would look as if she became as soulless as he was. I do not understand what Riaz said, because if he had died, the world would only win it. This may be true, but he grew up that murder was not the best option. During his career, the player Pepin also thought in the same way when his subordinates destroyed enemies by order. But now that the game became a reality, it seems that his subjects have also started to think about it. As the number of subjects increased, the old methods of solving problems no longer worked. She again apologized to Mr. Pepperin and bowed to him, feeling the great guilt for daring to impose on him her point of view. Pepperon replied that she has the rightness, and they are majestic swordsmen. Even when they are harassed, They should not forget about mercy on their opponents. This time, the hero decided to save the enemy's life at the request of the Reese, and informed Pursue that they would bring him to the possession of the SP-yielding families. Meanwhile, Lala, along with Geese and Arium, hurried corridors, surprised by the lack of cells for slaves. They had to rush for the sake of rescue. That is why Gus had previously suggested returning to the back, so as not to get lost. But she was loudly reminded him that they were glorious warriors, and there was no word retreat in their vocabulary. She asked not to turn away from them and insisted on silence. Considering the broken grate, the members of the group tried to understand that the devil had happened here. One of the men asked the prisoner who did it, but he knew nothing. Spotlessly looking out of the corner, the kerosene suggested that these were slaves' cameras. He noticed that he had a head of the Air Force gang before him and wondered why the camera was broken. It was necessary to evaluate the situation quickly. However, returning to Lalai, he realized that she had disappeared. Lala had already rushed into the battle, trying to find out the enemies where he is. She was amazed at their boldness and demanded that the truth be revealed immediately. Meanwhile, the kerosene decided to free all the slaves and undertook the treatment of their wounds. He wondered how RIR and Mr. were in the registration room. The master explained that she and Rias tried to escape. This development appeared to be logical. The alarm was turned on when they were exposed. Reese was upset and apologized for the situation. However, Pepperon believed that the apology was not needed because it was even better. If you stay in place, the Glems and Forces VVS will soon break here, and it will be possible to deal with everyone faster. The hero asked the name of the gnome. Khan named her name, and Pepperon thanked her for trying to save the ray. Khan believed that he was the same gnome as she was, but he was struck when he knocked down a thief from one blow. The words of Reis were true. It is really strong. In addition, she noted his attractive appearance. Pepperon wondered if everything was fine with her, and Khan was getting rid of. Going closer, he touched her forehead, thinking that she had a fever. Donna blushed with shame, but loudly assured that she had no temperature, and in general everything was fine. Pepperon wanted to say that she was misunderstood. The pen stood behind the hero and smiled, holding a cutoff in his hand. He realized that these worthless races of garbage, which he was so worried about, actually had significance to him. Using the magic of his ring, Fessirin sought to regret it to contact him. Pepperon was stunned by the fact that the finger could still move, but suddenly Fanaj came and hit the enemy with her foot. Mr. and Rajaz were embarrassed to see the finger on the ground. Harpia rejoiced in meeting with Pepperon and herself. She explained that she was looking for a key to the cameras and came across them. Fanaya hugged her Gru and said with happiness that they were looking for her all this time. She was infinitely glad that he was finally safe, to which the elf responded the same warmth. The student asked Harpy about Pack, and Phanasia proudly stated that he was his subordinate. He obeyed her because she was a commander. That's why they are here. She boasted that she has destroyed many enemies here, and only the main opponent was still. However, she recently coped with Agitate, those who have not even heard of money. The mission was fulfilled, and Phanosia was so happy that she couldn't understand why she was here. Pano was stunned by her happiness, while Reese considered her unsurpassed. After the case, the hero suggested meeting Lala and others. The finals were already boring, so she decided to take on a task that could be accomplished without much effort. Meanwhile, he was sitting on the Air Force gang. He heard that weak dogs bark the most vocal, but his opponent seems to have no strength. Then he decided to look inside to understand how things were going there. Lala, Kerosene, and Arayam went into one of the cameras but could not understand where the IU went, because it disappeared without a trace. Suddenly the steps were heard behind, and the Reese turned to the upset Lalai loudly. It was RIC with Mr. Pepperin and a maid Paul, so both teams joined. Lala hugged the Reese and was glad that everything was fine with her. The Kerosene noted that the group of Mr. Pepperon had previously found RI. The hero replied that it was a long story, and asked if they completed the liberation of slaves. The Kerosene reported that they had released all slaves and provided them with medical care, and it turned out that they had not eaten for a long time, so they were completely exhausted. The hero decided that the situation could still be corrected. At first, he sought to take everyone outside and then inspect the local warehouse with products. If they find something valuable, they plan to take everything with them. The lady replied that she knew one place well because she has already worked and cleaned. Therefore, Pepperin asked them to do what the maid was offered to rely on her. Lala was angry. How could she talk to Mr. Pepperin? The fact that they belonged to one race did not give her any right to speak so boldly. Lala believed that the master was trying to seduce him, but the master replied that she didn't even think about it. After getting to the composition, they opened the door and saw a bunch of food and boxes. With tears of joy in their eyes, everyone started eating. Together with geese and packets, they decided to accompany the finger and the rest of the beginnings to the suttings. Lala and Iri and Phony had to spend Riza and others to the village. The captives did not know what to do next. But Pepperon reassured them, explaining that from that moment they were no longer slaves, but free people. Probably some of them had nowhere to go. They were offered to join Lalai and the rest, which provided their safety. Ray looked carefully at the thoughtful lady and asked what had happened. However, the gentleman remained stationary and did not know how to proceed. Then Rija suggested that Lani go with her if she had nowhere to go back. The lady did not want to admit it, but if it was so important for Rias, she agreed. The girl took a surprised maid and pulled behind her. Meanwhile, Lucy could not wait for Lucy in the village of Pepron. Nobo tried to reassure her, assuring that everything would be fine. Suddenly, one of the locals exclaimed to Nobo, turning to him as a son that someone was approaching. "I will run to meet my sister." Hugging his sister, Lucy was incredibly happy to see her whole and unharmed. She never asked to run from the village again. Rise apologized for making her worry. He only cried with the touch of this scene. Nobo noted that someone was missing and asking Lala where the owner and the rest. Lala replied that the owner, along with Hus, had already left. By passing the leaders of VBs to the Spaulding family, the characters go to the Spaulding Fortress, located in Tudza Castle. The general saw a small commander in front of him, who immediately returned to him and asked who was the man who accompanied them. The emperor replied that he was one of the leaders of the VVS, who had a lot of harm to the Spaulding family. The general, astonished, rose from the table and could not believe his eyes. The hero reported that their hiding place is located in the northeast, under ancient ruins. The remaining mercenaries are kept in cages so that you can personally be convinced of it. The general ordered a group of soldiers to go to the area immediately, and they agreed without hesitation. He still couldn't believe that their mottled settlement managed to do so in a short term. He thought that now. The general smiled and agreed, remembering his promise. In addition to reducing the tax, it has raised a valuable gift. You wanted to hear that the leader of the group about the air forces would say. In this case, the hero was already going to leave, but before that he reminded the general of taxes. The general called the commander Pepin. Having reached out to the boy, he expressed his hope that he would continue to serve a family who is constantly expanding his horizons. Shaking his hand at the general, Pepper agreed with his words. Coming out of the castle, Peppering met with Patch and Goose, who greeted his return joyfully. Gus praised the hero for a well-fulfilled mission and handed him a sword. Poppering emphasized the arrangements and said they were now free to return home. Pachi still did not understand why they were drawn here. Unlike the past, their village remained within the limits of the possessions of Spaulding. Gus believed that it was necessary, because they provided important information about problems in their territory. Mr. Pepperin asked about it, and the hero agreed with him. The brownies sighed in a way, noting that it was too difficult for him. Guy looked at his subordinates and realized that he was in fact rescued by Kerosene. If so continues, the conjunctions will begin to trust them even more, and this will allow them to expand their territory. But everything will be much more difficult than in the game. Political intrigues will be much more confusing than game mechanics. He reports Hus that their ranks have been replenished for almost 100 people. He believes that a detachment of glory can be reborn and seeks to train them so as to humiliate enemies. Goose notes that the goblins are numerically less, but if they create a secret team, it can be their advantage. The expansion of the territory was also important, but first of all, it was necessary to strengthen military power. The Feths believed that the involvement of hundreds of residents did not make sense if the army consists of only 7 people. By dividing into 2 detachments for peasants' training and finding magical books, they will be able to optimize their actions. The hero decided to return to the village first, and then discuss further plans. He expressed gratitude to everyone for his wonderful job. Thanks to their efforts, the number of participants has increased, and the glory of Gloria is gradually returning. However, as Pepperon confessed, they lack military capacity. You need to teach newcomers and look for old books about magic in ruins. Gasset argued that it was in these ruins that books with powerful magic, drawings, and many other useful things were hidden. Phenosia was delighted, and also sought to visit the ruins where the steel dragon was hiding. The aisles that were closed by powerful magic were at a certain distance. The Pucus asked where they were going. The hero replied that they were heading to the Borf Tower. Stunned by Mr. Pepperon, he was noted for an endless flow of wonderful ideas, and Ari wondered who would accompany him. In response, they learned that Gus, Finzi, and Nobo have gone with Pepperon. Without understanding anything, she screamed and asked again. She turned to Mr. Pepperon with a question. Lala realized that Arius was needed for martial arts, and he should protect the village, but for some reason she remained with those who did not hike. Lala was afraid that during a mission to the slave trade did something wrong. She believed that she spent too much time on the road to cages with prisoners because she did not know the way. At this time, many innocent lives could be saved, and in all this she blamed herself. In a depressed mood, she apologized to Mr. Pepperoni, who assured her that it wasn't about it. In his absence, someone had to take responsibility for the village. Here the ideas of the lawn shone with new colors when the hero confessed that he had considered everything well and decided only she was able to take his place, and no one else could do it. The thought of Lord lit a bright light in her eyes. He hoped that no one would have objections, and everyone unanimously confirmed the lack of disagreement. The hero had high hopes for the help of Lalai, and she, without hesitation, assured that she could be completely counted. Nobo decided that in this case it was necessary to tell the boys from the village about searching in the ruins of the room, and the hero thanked him for his help. He thought of someone and went to the village. Nobo told Meadows and Rise about the planned search for ruins. The departure had to take place in 3 days, but their wounds seemed to have not yet healed completely. Moreover, this place is very dangerous, so if they are not sure, they can refuse. While the master was thinking about the search in the ruins, the Roma's eyes lit up, and she enthusiastically stated that they were ready to go and could be fully trusted. Nobo smiled and decided to inform others about their decisions. The master could not understand why she agreed immediately, because no one knew what could happen. Something could go wrong, and then everyone would have died. Gro assured her friend that everything would be fine, because Mr. Pepperon and others would support them. In addition, she believed that it was their chance, although the master did not understand what her girlfriend meant. Of all the dwarves, only Mr. Pepperon and the lady remained in place, and Riz did not rule out any opportunity. The lady was slaughtered, not realizing what he fantasized the shirt and what opportunities she described it. Her voice sounded gently, and she apologized, because Mr. Pepperon approached them. Bella, who hid in the bushes, suddenly jumped and scared the girls. She confirmed that Mr. Pepperon had great hopes for them. To raise it meant to betray not only his trust, but also the deep beliefs of Gloria. Lala turned to them loudly, noting that it is impossible to relax in any way, because it was a military operation. She especially addressed the lady, hinting that she did not understand anything at all. Paula cast a wicked gaze and warned the lady not even trying to seduce Mr. Pepperon only because they were one race. But the master was indignant that she didn't even think about it. In any case, the trip to the slave dress was unthinkable, so Lala insisted on her own. She decided to find something appropriate so that the master could stand before Mr. Pepperon. The master, waving her hands and legs, assured that she was able to dress on her own. 3 days passed, and gathering his team, the hero entrusted the village to his comrades and went on the road. Reese asked Mr. Pepperon to obey and not create problems for others. Reese eagerly agreed with her older sister, and the gentleman noted that they were more reminiscent of her mother with her daughter than sisters. Lala decided to remind the lady not to give this value, only because she and the hero belonged to one race. However, the lady was indignant that she knew all this. When everyone gathered, the hero gave a sign to go to the Boro Tower, and the team went in search of the ruins. The city of Rabel was located near the Boro Tower. In the local tavern, people discussed whether they knew that the whole essence of Alphazard and the Empire was in the Air Force. However, when they were discovered, everyone was thoroughly destroyed. The friend of the interlocutor could not believe it. But here they are. Knights Savalding. However, he heard that there is only one gnome behind all this. Hearing these words, the man sitting opposite them at the bar squeezed a glass. A friend just laughed and assured that all this was fictional. The guy sat behind the bar shouted to them, wanting to hear that story. The gentleman and the ruse were faced with the aggressive rabbits that attacked the team. As the kerosene predicted, after all the history of the Air Force, they did not lack the courage. Although the RI, according to Fantasia, remained a little good-natured. Soon all the rabbits won. The hero smiled, Seeing that the girls were doing, Reese thanked the Pepperin, and the maiden replied that they had exactly the strength for such a task. The young man noted that if they are difficult for them now, then probably, in this case, their next task was to defeat the bear ogre, who lived in the neighboring forest. Pepperon decided to wait for their return here, and Riai happily worried when she heard about such a challenge. The hero smiled and noted that, uniting the forces, they have a chance to win a bear. The gentleman agreed, saying that they could. However, the boys in the group doubted whether they would work out, and believed that Lord had set a difficult task on them. However, the hero was well aware that such methods may seem excessive. However, in this way, they will understand how much the battle of the powerful enemy is in the battle. Before they reached the Borf Towers, he wanted them to master the bases firmly. Pepper asked Finod and Nobo to wait on the spot, taking with him tents. Nobo decided that they would take this opportunity for cooking, and Finya happily supported him, hearing about that idea. Reyes doubted that they would cope with the two, and the master decided that her girlfriend had scared. Rice explained that the bear was seemed to be a bloodthirsty monster. She imagined him from which one could only flee and not look. The lady reassured her, noting that it was just a bear. She remembered how she won those rabbits, and she was ready to deal with the bear. But as soon as these thoughts flashed in her head, as a formidable roar of the bear sounded behind her back, the big bear, like a huge shadow, hung over scared girls. The cut and the gentleman rushed out, and the Reese did not stay, reminding her friend that she was about to deal with the bear. The lady exclaimed that she would not do anything for anything, because she would not kill such a huge bear. Despite its huge mass, the bear moved incredibly quickly. He was approaching such a speed that she realized they would be trapped. She turned sharply to the monster and struck him with an unexpected blow. The bear stopped, looking at his stomach in surprise. The lady realized that she did not harm him at all. Reese warned the girlfriend to be careful. At the same moment, the bear swung the giant pot, but Ray had time to push the maid, and they rushed together in the thicket. Hiding behind the bushes, the girls tried to restore their breath faster. The gentleman felt like her life was slipping down, and looked at the Reese with fear. Reese assured that it is not necessary to worry, it's just a scratch and everything is fine. The gentleman is oppressed. The lady apologized to Riaz for attacking the bear herself. Now they had to combine efforts. Reese was aware that they could not cope with one, but together they could overcome the bear and cut it into pieces like cabbage. They perceived the morale even before the bear found them and turned them to strike. Right in front of the girls appeared Pepperon, who, using fiery magic, struck the bear with the flames from his hand. The flames escaped even more powerful, forcing the bear to retreat. Lifting his head up, he noticed another figure that was approaching him. Has hit the bear straight into his nose, from which he fell to the ground. Rise joyfully met Mr. Pepperon and Gas. The hero realized that it was too early for them to compete with such opponents, but at the same time acknowledged that they received an important lesson. Kona never lost his morale, no matter who stood before her. However, there were times when she was at risk of fighting on her own, which could threaten his comrades. In contrast, Rue always thought of others, but her kindness sometimes turned into weakness, and it could be fatal for her. When their individual forces were insufficient, they found a new power in unity. Yes, Pepperon and his friends combined efforts and took both under their defense. Pepperon decided that once they had already purchased food for dinner, it was time to go back to Nobo and other comrades. The girls gladly followed the hero. Going with the team, the young guy confessed that he was surprised. He did not expect someone else to go on the air forces and territory. He believed that they would have a chance to become famous in the Empire Alphazard Gate. It was a young adventurer named Rock Ballast. Manasi Canberra supported him and also considered it advisable to visit the place of events to see everything in her own eyes. The knights thought they would cooperate with him, but they had a lot of trouble. Micro Ristar did not believe that the leader of the Air Force won the dwarf. She asked Rock whether it was true. A guard named Ban Gentry confessed that it was hard to believe. However, if the Commander Lu states so, then it is true. The year eagerly wants to understand what this silky dwarf is really capable of. Minas drew his attention loudly. Rock turned and saw a flock of stone wolves that guarded the entrance to the Borf Tower. One of them rushed at the boy, and Rock, instantly grabbing the sword, loudly ordered him to go on the offensive. The Pepperon detachment was stepping on the tower, understanding that wolf guards were stored. They could only enter after they cope with them. The master began to worry a little. Arriving at the place, Nobo noticed that someone was already fighting with the guards. Pepin also noted that they were ahead of them. He saw Pepperon's group and shouted that it was too dangerous here, calling them to flee. Fran and he remained behind what the hero used. Pepin used a snowstorm, and the wolves were glared like the whole district. He realized that they were adventurers and apologized for the intervention. Rock thanked him for his help, after which he transferred attention to his Nodian origin. He thought that before him the same gnome hero, who recently won V5S within the San December. The hero was impressed with his words. After a brief hesitation, he confirmed that it was. Rock thought it was great because he did not expect to meet him. They also wanted to oppose them, but the group lacked any information about rivals. The hero could not understand why this guy looked so refined. He did not resemble others at all. Rock explained that they were ordinary peasants, and to meet such a young man in their environment was a rarity. Rock reached out to Pepperon, introducing himself to the main character of the game. He was called Rock Ballast, and he was genuinely glad this meeting. Reese advised him to calm down and think about who he was talking to. After all, Pepperon was a liberator of 7 races. She screamed to the boy that the most famous ruler of the Great Septum, the greatest hero of this world, was Mr. Pepperon. Pepperon was amazed that Reese spoke the same words as Lala. This group was surprised to hear about Gloria Septum. They have never heard of something like that. Rock noticed that a group of heroes went to the tower of the board and suggested joining them, assuring that they would not be a burden. Pepperon believed that it would hardly be convenient, but the connection with them was already established. It was pointless to deny them, because they would still follow, interfering with their ideas. Therefore, Pepperon replied that they were indifferent, but their goal was not military victories. The main thing for them is to find magical books and train. If it is suitable, they can join. Doc smiled and agreed, because it did not really bother him. The girl who was a major came to her partner and quietly asked him to be polite. They said they are only here because of the guard wolves and are not even going to climb the tower. Rock understood this, but wanted to see with his own eyes a force capable of overcoming those wolves. In addition, if they are accepted now, his reputation as a morning adventurer will be tarnished. More recently, their level has been B, but since then, as the leader, they have informed their group. They have gone in the way. Nasi exhaled hard. For some reason, the news did not surprise it. Rock waved forward, but the girl shouted that they did not know where the entrance was. The heroes stepped on the first floor of the burrow. Rock looked around, thinking that this tower hides the mystery inside. And Mickey Rosastar noted that the atmosphere is quite gloomy here. He agreed with her. Besides, the place seemed quite deserted. Reese wondered how they would get to the upper floors. Goss already knew the answer to this question and pointed his finger on it. They looked at the magical circle and thought it was real magic. Nobu explained that it was a circle of teleportation. If you make an error when used, they will fall on the lower floors, and then they are waiting for trouble. The guard understood everything, and acknowledged that the system really had shortcomings. But Pepperon already knew the path to the upper floors, so they could get there without problems. The gentleman smiled, realizing that it was easier than it seemed. Pepperon asked his friends to stay calm and stay away from the circle. Pepperon did not have time to say how Panja was already in the center of the circle and urged them not to hesitate and to go. The guy did not understand why nothing happened, because as soon as someone was in a circle, monsters had to appear. He suggested that everyone needs to be in a circle at the same time. Pepperon, on the contrary, was convinced that the circle could not be used until all the monsters were overcome. The team that stood in the west of Pepperon and the year decided to follow their example and create a circle. Pepper suggested that they wait for a radiant circle. Nissi, like everyone else, was amazed. In their eyes, people in the circle disappeared, and with them the circle disappeared. The master decided that in this way they would not be able to reach the upper floors, when suddenly something attracted her attention. She looked around and screamed with horror, seeing a huge monster that resembled a giant spider. Heroes and noise did not have what it was, and how it appeared. Pepin was indignant about himself, not understanding what was happening. He noticed that this event was strikingly different from what was in the game. It seemed not so easy to solve this problem. Roxmark was confused without realizing what was happening here. However, one way or another, you will have to resolve this case with a handshake at first glance. Pepperon agreed and decided that there would be enough chat. He suggested that the Roxa team demonstrate their capabilities. Rock gladly agreed to demonstrate his power, and warned that he would not make the mistake he had made with wolves. The hero believed him without hesitation. The boys rushed to the enemy, and Rock exclaimed that they would certainly end this monster. Meanwhile, Pintigi with the company reached the second floor of the Tower of the Board. They noticed that Mr. Pepperon and the rest were also delayed there. Nobo assumed that they could be moved to another floor. If so, the kerosene suggested getting closer to the top of the floor. However, the guard of Rock hesitated to solve this task on his own. He had no doubt about their power, but worried that something could happen to them if they went. In addition, the idea of himself changed a little. It seemed to him that Pepin was most aware of this tower. Thinking about the threat that the stones were carried, he was worried about their return. But the Finning reassured him, assuring that they had repeatedly experienced this earlier. She offered him not to worry and move on. The guard was surprised by her confidence, which was based on the power. And Nobo admitted that she had this fearlessness because of her inability to plan in advance. However, the kerosene believed that if Mr. Pepperon were with them, they would constantly feel as boldly. In the end, the kerosene decided to move to the first floor. Meanwhile, the heroes and Mr. Pepperon were able to overcome the spider, and the hero asked the guys if they felt the difference between him and the default bear or horned rabbits. The Cut and the Pony tiredly agreed, because they could not predict his actions. Guy cast his gaze on the palmate of Rock, realizing that the avant-garde was keeping a fierce struggle. The rear guard was supported by magic, and in general they had a team. The hero decided that such an act would be a great example for Mr. and Ryaza. The shot was clicking on Meki, and the girl immediately applied a frosty blow. At that time, Rock snatched the sword and dealt with the enemy. Pepin praised them for their perfect work, and Rock confessed that it was not bad. Manasi cast a tricky look at the year, noting that it is difficult to cover him without Mike. When all the monsters were defeated, the gentleman and the residue noticed a circle. Now they could climb to the top. However, Pepperon intended to check something more. It seems that the terrain has changed since it was here for the last time. We are here. Without Fontasia and others, it was not easy for them to reach the upper floor. Manasi was horrified by guessing that the hero was mean. Pepperon agreed with her. Now they would have to overcome this tower alone. Of course, numerous strong monsters were waiting for them on the way to the top of the tower. If they were all at the level of the guardian spiders, Pepperon could protect them. But everyone had to take care of their own safety first. And the guardian spiders, as it turned out, were probably the simplest of all. They still had a choice, to go through the door in front of them. But Pepperon suggested waiting for him to conquer this tower and lead everyone else. They had to enter this circle as the path to the upper floor became irreversible. If they are not sure of their own, it is better to stay here. However, Rock has already told him everything. It would not be a burden for him. In addition, as a brave adventurer, he had already entered the dungeon, and would never allow himself shamefully fleeing, lining his tail. Pepperon again imagined himself as the protagonist. Menace was amazed that Rock had not yet tired of wandering the first level. She believed that they had already had enough adventures on this floor. In her opinion, it will be best to wait here, because it was too self-confident in the conquering the Borf Tower. Honestly, she believed that in the past, she had already achieved considerable success. She said, dissatisfied with the magician, that she came here not for the sake of beauty, but the threat only smiled at the predatory, not believing her words. Manasi noted that the little lady was moving quite cleverly, while the Raza looked awkward. However, Riaz noted that they are also on the approach, and unlike her, they are not at all afraid to get out on the Borf's tower. Manasi agreed, but still wondered how they managed to win the Air Force with such a team, when the elves and gnomes were clearly staying at home and not leaning. Pepperon and a lady. Rock bowed to the hero and apologized for Manasi, who was actually a good person, just sometimes could lose control. But Pepperon decided it was a trifle. He looked at the lady and Riaz and warned, "They still have the opportunity to change his mind, because if they decide to retreat, then they will only expect death." Everyone decided to join the magic circle and ended up in another room. Looking around, the residue thought they got the second floor. The master also noted that he is little different from the first. Minas asked Pepperon where the next teleportation circle was. Rock could not believe that there was no circle of teleportation on this floor. However, Pepperon assured that it was impossible and decided to carefully search the premises. Starting from the second floor, the teleportation circles were located. If the circles were not in place, they would not be able to climb or go down. He sighed heavily and pressed against the wall, reminding everyone of a warning to stay still. They turned this room upside down but found nothing. She realized that it was ordinary vanity. Looking to the side, she noticed a huge monster who looked carefully at her. In a panic, not realizing that it was a creature, Menace was scared, especially when the monster began to move. Pepperon suggested that it could be a guard. The circle probably had to appear after they overcome the opponents. Although the principle was a little different, they still had to be defeated. The year ordered Mr. Enrijas to stay and not attack in any circumstances. At the same time, he and Manat had to give everything from himself to overcome the call. The threat was ready for the battle and received an order from the hero. With these words, they grabbed their weapons, and Pepperon strongly rushed. He ran to the enemy with a quick jump and struck his sword in a jump. Faced with the attack, the hero realized that the monster has an iron body, and a simple sword was not able to cut it. As Mr. Pepperon envisaged, it is impossible to defeat this creature by force. He decided to act differently at the moment when the monster got 2 more swords from behind. The monster swung on the hero, but Pepperon was able to beat the blow and smiled. Remedy from the swords of the monster, he hit him with fiery magic. The flames escaped from his hand and enveloped the enemy. The flames did not last a long time. The monster quickly spread, and it disappeared. The hero expected such a course of events and calmly watched the enemy. Mr. and Rias were closely monitored for the battle, and it seemed exciting for writing. The hero rises high upwards, using fiery magic and directing it directly to the enemy. He threw the flame 3 times, never slowing down the pace. Reese could not understand why Mr. Pepperon was stubbornly using only fire, because the monster did not act at all. However, the master assured that this was the essence of the game. The enemy's guard realized that his armor was beginning to melt. The hero did not hesitate, and decided that it was a wonderful opportunity to strike a monster with a sword. The blow was so powerful that he just cut the enemy in 2. Pepper glanced at the main enemy and exhaled lightly. He applied the flames 5 times on one floor, seeking to maintain maximum forces for the highest level. Without the presence of Pinhai and others, he could not swing his sword so freely. However, he believed that his makeshift performance was quite good. It was even better if the attack was accompanied by a name. The girls shouted happily, admiring Mr. Pepperon, who, according to them, was incredibly cool and not like other dwarves. They dreamed of becoming as strong as him and to participate in battles with him. Mr. I imagined Pepperon approaching her, kneeling, takes her hand, and asks her to join the battle with him. Mr. Red, like a ripe tomato, trying to drive away these thoughts and unpleasant feelings. She justified herself, assuring that she was just sorry for the master, and she wanted to help him a little. Paradise tried to understand what was happening to the lady, because it was all red. The lady assured her friend that everything was fine, and she just thought about what Mr. Pepperon is wonderful. The girl smiled and confessed that she was so frightened that she could not move. The only thing she thought was about how sorry she was unable to help Mr. Pepperon. Thoughts about the words of that girl were obsessive. She said she was not suitable for battle, but the master was deeply convinced. She was approached by a hero who answered in the same way as a master. But it was not true for him. Not only attackers but also defenders are important in battles. This time, he ordered both to be in the rear guard, and it was thanks to their obedience that he was able to fully focus on the attacks. Monasi proved to be incredibly strong. Only 2 they were able to navigate the situation and act decisively. It would be great if Rice and Mr. They emphasized something of their battles, but they also had nothing to boast about. The gentleman was noticeably revived and assured the hero that they would make every effort. Pepperon felt relieved. It was difficult for him to repeat it again and again, and he dreamed of having an arsenal of royal phrases or something like that. Looking at another guard, he thought whether to trust the rock team to completely defeat him. Meanwhile, the security guard hit the blow but was rejected. The power of the opponent was much larger than it seemed after one single blow. Menace was worried about the year, worried about everything was fine with him, which Rock assured her in his safe. The girl suggested that the year use the same techniques as the spider guard, believing that it would stop him. Rock agreed with the idea and entrusted this case with Minas. Minas shouted, ordering him to leave the territory and start the attack. The boy listened to the girl and jumped, being over his head of his puzzled rival. Immediately after that, Manasi's jump hit her stamp on the ground, causing the appearance of stone thorns. The attack directed to the enemy, but the guard made every effort to block it with his 2 swords. Manise attackers obviously did not predict that such a guard could repel their attack. As soon as the enemy was released from the boat, he immediately rushed for the year, waving his sword. Menacey shouted at the guy, and he quickly prepared to beat his hands. He did not expect a guard to maneuver in the air. But as soon as the guard was going to strike, the hero hastened to help. Waving his sword, he made a fire stroke, after which his sword and body split in half. Pepin gently landed on the floor while the soldier collapsed behind his back. The hero suddenly realized that if he immediately enveloped the sword with flames, he would not have spent unnecessary energy. The threat was stunned by the fact that Pepperon had a blow to him on his first attempt, but this is exactly what Rock expected. Therefore, Pepperon decided that time to proceed with the next 4. Suddenly, a magical circle appeared under their feet. The characters did not expect such a turn of events, and did not even fully understand what was happening. They tried to understand what had just happened and why it was so dark. The master suggested that they had already moved to the 3rd floor and touched the wall, not even realizing that it was. The stone dragon looked at the boys, and Rock exclaimed that he was huge. Pepperon was stunned by the fact that the dragon appeared on the 2nd floor, because he was convinced that it was a guard of the 5th floor. Meanwhile, the Fina and others team finally cleared the 8th floor of monsters. The guard from the Rock team was amazed by the fact that Fina was able to cope with these monsters on its own. Mika thought that from now on, such a bold harpia would be their reality. The kerosene pointed to the end of the room and exclaimed that there was a chest. Nobo advised to take as much as they could carry. Nobo also addressed Ms. Bend for help, and of course the security guard agreed to help them. Asia was convinced that Mr. Pepperon, together with others, probably were having fun now. Heparin, along with the heroes, entered the 5th floor, where they met a 2-headed dragon. Manaza was surprised that she saw such a miracle only in books. It was doubtful in the conversation whether they could overcome the dragon, but the hero decided that the 3 would cope. He ordered RIS to move on, and the lady to stay behind him, ready for action. Mr. Pepperon forbade them to participate in the battle because this monster was different from everyone who had encountered before. However, he believed that the dragon could be overcome by a combination of their efforts. With the dexterity of Hus, the power of the Fantasia, and the magic of the Nobo, they had every chance of winning. The engravings were worried that the gentleman and Rajaz could not be spent, and even in the rear would be in danger. The dragon could be fatally injured by one blow that caused panic. The hero looked at Menas and ordered her to protect Rias and the lady and cover them. Minas agreed, stating it loudly that she understood. Nasi struck the girls in her own words, noting that she was protecting them once, they can just relax. She offensively called them a weak Elpheus and gnome. Kosis came to the girls and, hitting her rod on the ground, built a protective field in the form of a dome that stood above them. Feeling safe inside, the girl asked everyone to sit quietly. The master enthusiastically examined the power field and exclaimed that it was incredibly cool. But Raya only cast her look at the girl. In this case, Pepperon suggested that all 3 would start the fight. The dragon rapidly rushed into the attack, but the characters, without spending time, directed their hand at the enemy. Azaz Shan thought to be a magician. It's quite cool. She dreamed that with magic could be achieved anything. Although she has not yet possessed this art, she still sought to master the control of fire, water, or explosions to become more useful for Mr. Pepperon. Reese recalled Manasi's words that joked about her, calling clumsy. She believed that this absolutely did not lead anywhere. Reese was upset that she was absolutely unable to spell, so she does not benefit from battles. She seemed worthless, and could not help Mr. Pepperon. According to Manasi, the Reese function is just a burden, so she was ordered to sit quietly in a protective field. Despite the excitement that the eyes always need protection, she clenched his fist and rushed. The gentleman tried to stop it, but the residue did not listen. The battle raged when Rock and Pepperon noticed how the resign was flying right on them. Manus was no less surprised, not realizing what the girl was doing here. The 2-headed dragon noticed a residue and rushed to the attack, and the maid shouted, preventing being careful. The streets closed her eyes and stretched her hands forward. From her hands, she released a powerful flow of light, blinding the dragon for a moment. Meanwhile, Manasi shouted that the moment has come and they should act immediately. Lauren and Rock boldly jumped over the heads of the dragons and waved their swords. At the same time, they punched the heads of 2 dragons, which did not even have time to expect this blow. The heads of dragons fell on the ground with a roar, and Rock and Pepperon landed on their feet. She did not have time to understand how she succeeded, how she heard that the master hurried to her girlfriend. Reese asked, but the master was delighted when she suddenly jumped and surprised her. It seemed cool, because the Reese used magic. While the master was fascinated, Menace went to them with a decisive step. She was in a fierce, turned to Reese and gave her a slap. Screaming at her, she called the girl a stupid eon who did not listen to the order and stayed in the field. She did not understand what made her run straight to the battlefield. She was angry and asked not to speak so, but Pepperon called the lady. He came to the conclusion that it was not necessary to interfere. Reese felt weak in her legs and confessed that she only wanted to justify Mr. Pepperon's hopes. They could not remain under protection forever. Manasi sought to be useful in any way. She exhaled heavily and asked to listen to her. Her supervisor did not forbid her to fight because she interferes. If it were so, she would just be left for the ground floor. Manasi suggested that the heroine had taken them with her because she saw her potential. And if she really wanted to reciprocate Kate, then she would not try to die pointless. The surprised glances went to Mrs. Menace, after which she worshipped, apologizing. Menace acknowledged that she also overdo it, and apologized mentally, believing that it was not necessary to say it. She sought to defend herself in battle, but had to stay away from the enemy. It was necessary to continuously evaluate the combat situation and provide proper support, as its light was not suitable for melee. Reyes smiled easily, assuring that she understands. She also confessed that she got a little accident in despair, not even having time to realize it. It could be a coincidence, but from now on, if Ree was able to train, she would be able to master even more powerful magic. Magic seems to have more talent than she was able to realize. These words surprised her. Everything except for the magic of ice was difficult for her. And without the support of Mikey's healer, her abilities were rather limited. Manasi acknowledged that she was not as powerful witchcraft as others could seem. Rock replied that it was thanks to her stationery that she could have spell, but the girl denied. She said the staff only helped her keep Manus. Mr. Pepperin decided to approach Aris and looked carefully at her. She fell down and apologized to him, but the hero remembered the light, the first battle where she was able to overcome the two-headed dragon, and it was really valuable. Fourth, Pepperon was much more relevant to her help than Ricia. The girl smiled and agreed with him. Walking her hand in their direction, she pointed out that there was a passage to the floor. He wanted to get to the floor with a monster to train the lady and restore the strength by beating small monsters. However, there were only middle bosses here, so they will not succeed. If they reach the upper floor and will not be able to, Rock noticed that Pepperon had gone into thinking and asked what had happened. The hero, following them, stated that he rests on them. Meanwhile, the Venetian team was on the upper floor, at the entrance to the highest level. They sat on a huge three-headed dog. Fanaya happily reported that almost everything was completed, and only the final boss remained. The guardian of the group was stunned. In the end, Fantasia overcame all the bosses. Nobu and others entertained, playing cards, and admitted that it was happening constantly. Suddenly, a magical circle emerged in front of them. Mr. Pepperon with red eyes, Mr. Menace and Rock joined their group. He was glad to find out that everyone is in order. The noble confessed that he was worried about them. Happiness swept it when it became clear that everything was fine and they were again together. Lesia appealed to Mr. Pepperin to inspect the treasures that have already accumulated a lot. The hero was surprised and expressed his admiration for the Harpia, but Roxgard noted that they had a little neglected. Rox noted that Mike pulled the rod in front of her and decided to go on. Closing her eyes and focusing on charming power, she released a fragile blue world. Their eyes glowed with admiration, because all wounds and scratches disappeared directly in the eyes. Rock and Manasi rejoiced, smiling and noting how great they feel. Pepper gladly exclaimed that thanks to her magic healing, all his forces returned to him. Gus wondered who was the Lord of the Wolf City. Nobo replied that his name was the God of Guards. It was the highest rank with a goal, which was also significant. It turned out to be an extremely difficult opponent. He had 4 hands. Rock rejoiced that they finally got the final boss, and urged everyone to cheer up and move in the attack. But Pepperon replied that the power of the God Guarantor himself would not be able to overcome him. They need to combine efforts and destroy the enemy together. The hero still insisted on going to the final boss. Everyone looked at the last pass, behind which they were waiting for the battle with the Keeper. The group under the leadership of Mr. Pepperon was climbing the stairs, preparing for a new battle and looking forward to what was waiting in front. As they climbed the stairs and passing through the arch, they found themselves on an open platform with a bright shining orb in the center. They were interested in the red sphere in front of them. Reese decided that it was a guardian god, because a sudden orb shone with a blinding light. The Reese warned everyone about his approach without drawing a vigilant look from the ball. Suddenly, a huge guardian god with numerous weapons in his hands came to them. The warrior from the rock group was impressed with the huge size of the guard. Compared to him, even dragons seemed only small heads nearby. He could not understand how they could withstand such a powerful creation. The weakness of the guard god was in the red sphere of the flame, which had magical power. Pepper ordered the kerosene to come to the left, and Penhigi was a matter of distracting the enemy. Age raised the swords, rejoicing because she finally met a real rival. The kerosene warned her not to admire. Pepin stated that they would destroy a weak point, sphere over the year. The hero wondered if he could use a flame, and Rock confirmed that he was able to. The Nobo wound his fists and asked to leave the rear of the rear. Meanwhile, the guard appealed to Mika to cover the entire floor with a protective field, which would allow them to heal. Manasi decided to install a protective field to give Mecha time to recovery. She also ordered Rijaz and the lady to stay together, as it was strictly forbidden to jump out on the battlefield this time. The girls confirmed that everything was understood. Pepin with a gesture invited them to start, and Gus with Fanthesia immediately rushed to the attack. He decided to distract the enemy, creating his doubles who, together with him, rushed to attack the guards. The guard tried to hit the dagger, but hit the floor under the feet of Gas. However, the keeper turned out to be agile, and quickly reacting, jumped on a massive chain of weapons of the enemy, approaching him along him. Having destroyed the chains, Gus looked at the fantasy, which without words understood his intentions and made thousands of blows. Her attack hit the target, embarrassing it. Fantasia called Mr. Pepperon. Nobo, without a second, focused, and together with others they simultaneously caused a flame. From the sky on the enemies, the huge tongues of the flames and the eyes of the lady had already shone with joy because of their success. However, soon the guards simply waved away from the blow and raised with even greater force. Nobo, after scolding the guards, grabbed Pepperon and Rock, trying to restrain them from a powerful wave of attack. Fenosia burst into pain due to burns, and the kerosene realized that they had lost their vigilance. The angry conjunction broke from the place and shouted that she was now really angry. From the acceleration of Harpia, she straightened her leg, trying to impress the guards with her branded blow. The opponent did not even pay attention to her, and easily reflected the attack. Fenny returned to Ms. Henriette, who carefully asked if she was fine with her. Catherine did not urge anyone to calm down, because the guard was going to attack again. Signs of anxiety from his strength began to appear around the guard. The guard created shackles who twisted and intertwined with the rest of the team. They began to prepare for the next attack, but Noba noted that everything is not going well. Minas was frightened and shouted that her shield would not withstand such a blow, and the kerosene decided that it was an end. The enemy launched incredibly large spikes, and Pepperon strained, gaunching his teeth. He was thinking of breaking the shackles, but suddenly a guard of rocks appeared in front of them and asked to move back. The heroes joyfully welcomed the bath, and he assured that everything was going on plan. Now, becoming a defender, he decided that he was obliged to fulfill his duty at any cost. He understood that if this went on, he would soon be destroyed. He strongly turned back when Salmosa, Reyes, and the gentleman tried to keep him in place. He could not understand why they did so. Seeing the situation, he shouted that their death would mean a collapse for everyone. Raisa also noted that their forces were on the verge. However, if they were already destined to die, then only together. He smiled and replied that he was gratitude to them, and then made every effort to repel the enemy's attack. Suddenly, the hostile attack was stopped, and the characters fell on the floor under the powerful influence of the shockwave. Her victim was also the guard, which was blinded by a bright flash. His shackles fell immediately, and Pepperin, along with his team, released. Hardly breathing, Ben proudly said that they succeeded. Menas, sighing even deeper, thought about the inevitability of her death. Rias and Mr. So far, they could not realize that they had escaped the impact, as they had already lost hope for salvation. Mickey noted that she had time to recover and could heal everyone. However, the baths decided that he could wait, asking first to treat Pepperon and cancer. Mickey obeyed and immediately applied red healing on the characters. Nobo smiled, noting that they were rescued by Mr. Ben. However, the guard denied, noting that everyone had made efforts, and he added that he was going to finally overcome the guardian god. Nobo agreed that they had succeeded together. In addition, the final blow had to be left behind Pepperoni and the year, because they were completely ready to fight. When Rock heard the proposal to put a point in this case, he immediately agreed. Quickly taking a course on the red sphere, they used fiery magic on their swords. At the same time, they hit the area that instantly flew into many debris. When life was raging in the fortress of the glorious village of Septim, Lala exclaimed that everything was ready. Mr. Pepin had long dreamed of opening public baths. Private beds were also prepared, where Mr. Pepron could be alone and rest. But Parchi decided that even here it was impossible to relax. She decided to finally go to the bath because she was not there for a long time. Lala became angry and upset, grabbing Dear Tail, forbade her to do it. She indicated that these baths belonged to Mr. Pepperon, and if she needed, she could use a common bath. But irritatedly replied that even without these reminders, she knew it, and had no desire to visit Mr. Pepperon's bath. She remembered Mr. Pepperon, who probably was tired after her long transition. And when he returned, she happily wanted to massage his back. An explosion came on the very top of the tower, and everyone was screaming around Mr. Pepper. Frag flew into the priests, covered with new cracks. The light began to radiate from it, and at the same time the god of the keeper gradually disappeared. The kerosene was glad to see that he was disappearing, although at the same time it made him think that it could mean the keeper was defeated, and everyone was filled with unspeakable joy. Mr. and Manassi clapped his hands and shouted with a triumph. It was exactly what they expected from the strongest warriors, and Rock was also incredible. Mr. noted that they are all incredible. Nobo and G. Mika approached Finya, which was still lying on the floor. The kerosene told her that everything was over, but Fina was just talking about food. Mika realized that Finzi fell asleep with deep sleep. Suddenly, someone called Pepperon, calling him the king. Rock expresses gratitude for the unchanged support. It was because of him that his comrades felt stronger. Pepperin replied that he absolutely did not plan to take them with him, these masters, and Rock did not understand what the meaning of the hero is. They themselves decided to go to the Boro Tower, and in the end, he warned that he could be back before the second stage. Pepperon was convinced that they got here thanks to their own power, and he only accompanied them. Pepperon was glad to hear such words from the king. At the same time, he felt that he should be gratitude. Thanks to the meeting with the masters, the gentlemen and the Riaz have gained new knowledge and experience. Especially transformed Riaz, under the influence of Manasan. The kerosene noticed something unusual on the chest of God and immediately shared the find with Mr. Pepperon. The hero only had time to consider what he saw. However, the place was dangerous, and Mr. Pepperon suggested that the contents of the chest and divide it outside. Meanwhile, Haz was interested in where the treasure was found previously. Nobo replied that they were left in the previous room. The girls were surprised by the huge size of the chest. Meanwhile, in the city of Ravel, near the Wolf Tower, there was an explosion. One of the locals remembered that a young adventurer visited the tower. The rest could not believe that they had caused such a mess. Instead, the man who was nearby noted that it was an absurd assumption. On the upper floor of that tower lives a killer bear more than 30 meters high. It protects the treasure of unspeakable wealth, gold and silver. Everyone who believed in these legends, travelers and thieves, tried to penetrate there, but no one was able to get alive. The peasants believed that they came across a half, so-called dragon, and later heard human cries that seemed terrible to them. After all the decorations and bags were collected, Pepperon asked the boys to forget nothing. Suspecting that the portal could be their way nearby, the master hoped to avoid new unexpected adventures or a meeting with a dragon. However, as Pepperon noted, it was the upper floor, and the only way out was the outside world. So they needed the portal wherever they went. Nobo lifted the bag and decided to put up with any events. Fengja smiled and noted that in this case they were returning to the outside world. Raoul was able to read, and all the characters were lined up in a circle. On the training ground of Gloria, Septim was loudly voices. There was an intense training on the other side, because it was necessary to make 500 lifts on the press, which was a real challenge. He was one of the peasants he coached. Smiling, he could not understand why they decided to take a break. So their dream of becoming part of a special assault unit will never come true. I ordered Poch to make 500 push-ups, and the guys, despite extreme fatigue, agreed with that. It was then that Ari stood up to Poch and noticed the strict conditions in which he held the partners. But Poch only tried to turn them into real special forces. After all, Mr. Pepperon personally taught Rijaz and Pana. His determination to educate invincible soldiers was undeniable. Poch also recalled that Ari had previously wanted to swim. Iria lingered with the answer, taking his gaze, and Poch decided that he was working out the technique of washing his back. Eric asked Lala whether it was really necessary. Lala replied that she was doing her best to help the tired Mr. Pepperon, and took her sponge in her hands. Lala wanted to wash Eerie thoroughly, but the girl decided that she was able to cope on her own. In fact, Lala did not look at her back at all, but her look scained Eerie. She barely had time to disappear as Paka guessed that she was not easy. Suddenly they heard she screamed of her eye, and Eerie said she had fled. He raised his head with a smile to the sky. He was convinced that now Nobo and others spend time with Mr. Pepperon. The gentleman was glad that they were on the street, and apparently they were safely getting out. The threat closed her eyes, thinking how much she had already missed the outside world. However, before entering the city, Pepperine suggested sharing the treasures. Looking at the diamonds, Pontus's eyes shone, and Ray's was also fond of great jewelry. Rock stared at the sword, astonished by his sophistication. Pepin also paid attention to him, and recognized the jewelry decorated with the sword of the thief. He was not equal all over the world, because it was a rare thing. This artifact symbolized the victory over Godgunner, and Pepperon, calling the year as a master, asked him to preserve. Rock was delighted and sincerely thanked Pepperon. When all the treasures were distributed, Pepperon decided that it was time to return to the village. Rock was surprised that the heroes wanted to go immediately, not wanting to relax in the rave. The hero explained that they founded the village, and they need to return there as soon as possible. Rock realized perfectly, because Pepperon was king. The hero also shared mystery over the year. He did not want to attract attention. He asked Rock to help keep their secret, and did not tell anyone about the meeting. Rock understood everything and accepted his request. Finea hugged Mike and promised that the next time they would have fun on the glorious September. Mike gladly agreed. It was honest to meet the heroes, and Nobo reciprocated. He suggested that Ban became the strongest unit of the organization. Reese urged to pay attention to the threat. However, the girl did not even turn into them, only asked to take care of herself. She did not like sad farewells, and she would be happy with a new meeting. Her thought was that it was better to say goodbye to her heart. Nevertheless, the farewell had to happen with a smile. The girls bowed to Manasi, sincerely thanking her for everything. They promised that the next time they meet will become stronger in witchcraft. Without retaining tears, the threat hugged the girls and asked them to try even more, because they would necessarily meet again. Meanwhile, Peppers and others watched the happy smiles as the girls said goodbye. The hero was said that they would also become stronger, and perhaps one day they will adventure. Then they will be able to improve with Pepperon. But before Rock managed to utter all the names of the heroes, he called him the king. The hero asked him to call him a Pepperon. After all, they fought side by side and became real friends. Rock supported and lifted his fist with the hero. Standing in front of the tower, they hit their fists, symbolizing their friendship. Exchanging smiles, Rock assured that they would necessarily meet again, and Pepperon, smiling, agreed with him. Rock approached the boys and admired it was incredible. They first met such a powerful dwarf, and it opened to them an endless world that they have not yet known. They thought that the peasants were calling them. They thought who could capture the Overdracht Tower. They remembered the explosion that happened there, believing that it was their idea. Rock wanted to explain that they had done it with Pepperon, but then mentioned his request to keep it secret. The man was impressed, seeing the sword with jewelry from the legends about the Wolf Tower. It turned out that their group really became the owners of the tower, though they did not consider it true. The locals felt an urgent need to report the whole city to the city about the appearance of the conquerors of the tower. However, Rock assured them that everything is not as it seems. Returning to the village, she sighed heavily, and the gentleman asked her what was the matter. Reese replied that this time they managed to gather and gain experience, but she thought that she was not useful. The gentleman thought that Rai assured that she was able to use magic, but could not help at all. She doubted whether Pepperon would ever reach the strength. She was afraid of this pace that she would be left behind. And suddenly, the awareness immediately called her. Paradise replied that after returning to the village, they would train together. They cannot afford to lose Messi, because the rest should become stronger. Riz is ready for everything to support the lady, and suggested that you combine efforts and fight together. The lady smiled widely, agreeing with Rijaz. Yupon exclaimed that she would not be restrained, and Rijaz replied that she wanted to hear it. Meanwhile, the human figure with horns and demonic eyes watched on the top of the rock. The creature said that she finally found a legendary strong gnome, and smiled mysteriously. A few days have passed since the boys went on an expedition. Meanwhile, Lala and Finance took care of the villagers. The Kerosene went to explore the situation in the nearest city, and Aerie conducted experiments with books she found in the board tower and taught a new sage. At the time, Pachai continued his training. He gave his student a 5-minute break, after which he had to run 50 circles around the village. Goblin named Coco finally waited for a break and breathed deeply. The old Kachai, who was also trained, left, noticing that Coco was barely holding on. It was a pathetic species, and the Harpian behind him noted that he was barely breathing. It was Harpia Atori, who also trained with them. Titan Deg resting on the sidelines and noted that it was not quite his element. He believed that he would best manifest himself in research. Hache, leaving the Titan's foot, shouted that their bodies were naturally more designed for battle than others. Therefore it is not time to read books. But Dog, peaceful, almost wept, defending himself from Kachai. He met with Mr. Pepeperon, who decided to visit them. He greeted the Lord joyfully, and proudly said that he strictly raised his students, so they became real strong guys. He thought that they would soon be able to go hunting, and it was very pleased with Peperon. Meanwhile, I have not finished your story yet. Students came from different environments, so there were often small quarrels. Therefore, he wanted them to become friendly and acted as a team. Peperon looked at those who argued and fully agreed with the packets. Apron suddenly shone and he asked Pachai to gather everyone together. He said loudly that Mr. Peperon had a conversation with them and asked everyone to listen carefully. Coco was delighted that Mr. Peperon himself seeking to talk to them. He suggested that this means a good reward. However, Harpia was sure that it was far from true. Initially, Peperon decided to express her gratitude for their hard work today. He also had a task for students, which was a surprise for Coco. They had to go to the Timon Cave, located nearby to the south. The hero asked them to eliminate the snail of the king who was there and collect the necessary materials. Titan Dag was frightened when he heard about the snails and even called them monsters. But Pepper assured that there was nothing to be afraid because they were not so strong. If everyone acted together, they would work out. However, Coco doubted whether it was safe to send them there unaccompanied. Pache replied that Riese and Mister would be near them. They participated in the expedition to the Borf Tower, so they will be able to become their mentors. Connor replied that they would be under their leadership this time. Paradise smiled at the group, noting that she would be pleased to cooperate with them. Hachai immediately raised his hand, wanting to ask a question. It may have been too bold on their part, but workout with an hourglass was not in vain. He did not think that the girls were much stronger than them, despite their experience and numerous expeditions. The words immediately caused annoyance, but the master kept calm. In part, Harpia agreed with this thought. They did not like to obey people they did not know well. The Taurus pushed their heads with secretly, without even realizing that these thunders were carried in their hands. Training and real battles differed as heaven and earth. In addition, the boys had to obey orders unconditionally and the children listened to him. While they dealt with the affairs, the group seems to be looking for Mr. Peperon. Nobo drew attention to the students who now listened to the performance. He asked the lady to provide her students for this. However, Mr. Peperon believed that it was good to have challenges that needed to be resolved, and this reminded him of Pachai himself during their first meeting. He was a little confused and did not know what to answer the king. He only asked the hero not to worry and promised that over time they would become stronger, turning into real knights both in the body and in the soul. However, Nobo believed that it would be too problematic if they looked like a pack, because he needed to learn humming. He was angry, deciding that Nobo was trying to study it with him. Paka asked Nobos more clearly to answer what question he was looking for. Nobo calmed down and said that they had come to a merchant, and he wanted to inform the king. He shouted Nobo that their conversation has not yet been completed. To the northwest of the famous septum, a dark cave was contained, and in that cave found a demon with 3 horns called Tires. He was a guard. The demon asked what the one who found him wanted from him. 27th. A girl with the same demonic eyes approached him. Hearing that the tire lost to some pathetic person, she laughed. She was also a demon with 3 horns, a demonic princess named Rinna, and he asked her where she knew it. But after all, his former chief was already seized by Sergum when she promised to release him if he told everything and provides a lot of information. Although he was now free, If will still pursue him. The demon Tyre replied that he did not remember to serve something like this. Rin smiled and, without worrying about it, raised her hand. The Tyre lost, but it did not surprise her, because his opponent was not easy. Despite this, the tire jumped out of place, thinking that Rin had come to him. Rin was only watching him because she first had to gather information. He was called a pepper, and he was a king of the recently created state, more precisely, a village called Gloria Septum. Rin was tasked with VVS to kill a pepperman, but it was complicated by the fact that he was surrounded by a large number of assistants who were constantly on her way. Rin hoped that Shin would be able to deal with them, although Shin did not understand her hints. Not that she did not cope, but she would be pleased if Shin helped to remove this garbage. Then she would take a tiny gnome to Celia. Shin became angry, grabbing his katana. Once behind Rin, he ordered her not to neglect his capabilities and stay away. After all, his goal was pepper on. However, Rin just smiled, because it was exactly what she thought. Taking her katana, she returned to Shen quickly and grabbed her throat. Pushing him to the ground, Rin acknowledged that she was not at all to listen to him at all, and called shell garbage. Of course, she promised to deal with this issue. But it was unclear why Shin did not want to join the case as well. So, she offered him a competition, who would be the first to handle. However, Shin waved it up, calling it a fool. She also wanted to report that Pepperoni Team was heading to the Grace's dungeon. In general, she was indifferent whether he would come, but it was a better option than just lying here. She waved for a farewell tire, and in response, he only looked at her, saying nothing. Maya shouted loudly throughout the house, not understanding why she was left here and not taken to the dungeon with her. The hero ordered Feonhesia not to be angry, but he understood her feelings. In the end, he asked to stay with Nobo, because they needed her help. Harpia stopped crying. He got a little bit, but eventually agreed. They decided to ask Mr. Pepperon if there was something bad that they want to bring with them, Mr. Enrijaz. He also acknowledged that the Grace's dungeon will be a difficult test for children. Previously, this dungeon served as a prison in the capital, where not only criminals, but also innocent were imprisoned. The spontaneous desires of these people have given rise to the monsters who live there now. Poda thought he would also escape immediately if he saw a ghost. Pepperin laughed and inadvertently agreed. In fact, he really was very afraid of scary stories. The test of courage for him will probably be a hike in the dungeon. They chose the team, and Pepperin told his friends that their exit would take place the next morning. He asked them to be prepared, and everyone agreed. He suggested that they may have come to a clash. However, when looking at their bodies, Pepperon considered it suspicious. There were no traces on the treasure chest. In addition, the bodies of the monsters were arranged too carefully, which did not look like the result of a fight. This meant that there was another person here, and Pepperon realized that the situation was different from what he knew from the game. She pointed her finger in that direction, and Pepperon asked what had happened. They saw a mysterious human figure that quickly threw the hood. They came closer to a strange figure. The kerosene decided that it was probably a human child, while Lala could not understand what she was doing here. The girl only told that they were attacked by monsters. Gus realized why there are so many bodies here, but the hero for some reason kept silence. Gus asked his comrades to go further and insisted that they remain in pairs and not separate. Lala did not understand what he tried to hint Pepperon. He cast his gaze on the girl and said he had to talk to her and could not leave her here. Lala and others agreed with his decision, and the girl asked the Pepperon to be careful, which waited silently until the Pepperon group disappears in the darkness of the dungeon. Pepperon asked the girl why she appeared here, because this place is not for casual visitors. The mysterious stranger was silent, and the hero acknowledged that she may not want to answer. He then changed tactics and asked if he was a goal. Kindi the cloak flew into pieces, and Rin jumped out of him trying to hit the Pepperon. The hero cleverly evaded, and the tire noticed his lightness and speed. However, Pepperon already knew that there was a monitoring, although it was still a mystery to the tires. Here Pepperon discussed with Hus information about the boys with the Air Force. Although the details were fuzzy, they were convinced that the enemy was acting on their own. In addition, the enemy followed them from the exit from the tower of the board. Gus advised to be careful, and Pepperon, realizing that the enemy from another country, thanked for the report. These were her actions and Rin confirmed it. She did not want to suffer, and decided to kill the enemy better without any difficulty. Pepperon was convinced that the girl came to take revenge on Shin, but she asked not to think so, because he had no significance for her. It was only her own. Finn already realized that this guy had selected something important from them, and it was angry. Pepperon looked at the demon as surprise, not understanding what she was in mind. However, Ren herself was ignorant and confessed that she was not interested in it. She came here for the sole purpose. Before she had to say something, Pepperin rusted-headed from behind, knowing what would happen next. Pepperin used ice magic, but the Rin remained indifferent to his attack and hit him in his forehead. He was stunned by such a turn of events and tried to repel her blow with his sword. He wondered what this decoration was on her back, assuming that it was hardly ordinary. Trin, calling him a non-life, said that she would not take the fight with one enemy seriously. With these words, she rushed into the attack, and Pepper skillfully evaded. Rin decided to ask him the same thing again, thinking that he had some decoration, but not understanding what happened. Pepperin, squeezing his teeth, realized that Rin now exceeds his strength, and used reinforcement. Pepperin attacked, and Rin was prepared to repel the blow. But the opponent was so fast that it was without much effort to struck her into his chest. Pepperin was satisfied with a good blow, and Rin looked at her with anger, which would be enough for 1,000 cursed. Recovering from the blow, she became even more serious. The demon shouted that Pepperin, believing that he was only trying to create the appearance of a harsh warrior. Rin licked her lips and directed katana to her opponent, warning not to regret later. Pepperin did not even know how power the Rin owns, because for the first time he met such energy. He gave the enemy a fast shot, which he barely had time to evade. The unknown feeling swept in his heart, and he could not understand what had happened. He looked at his hand, feeling that something had happened to his force for a moment. Rin did not allow him to be distracted. Thrusted, she exclaimed that now was not time to look at. While hitting him in a kathane into the chest, she reminded that the battle should not be distracted. Pepperin was stunned, realizing that this feeling was real. When katana touched him, his strength immediately left his body. He already guessed that this is how her weapon operates. When touched, it deprives the opponent of all opportunities. The same thing happened with the skill of cold-bloodedness that just disappeared. Rin smiled and, noticing that the hero was shaking, asked what had happened. Pepperin absorbed reflections on his further steps. He felt only one thing: fear. Realizing that he needed to flee, he felt pain and believed that his life was over. The hero realized, if he does not escape, she will destroy him. He frozen in horror, staring at the demon, not understanding what to do next. Rin could not understand where all his confidence disappeared, and it only added to her boredom. The guy, deciding to get rid of, replied that he did not use all his strength for such minor clashes. Then Rin decided to force him to act and rushed to the attack. Approaching the hero, she easily punched his shoulder with his katam. He grabbed the wound and fell on his knee. Rin came, hit her back and noted that he was only doomed to death. She was indifferent, because the fate for him was already determined. Suddenly, an explosion came, wrapping everything around a solid smoke curtain. Rin looked at the place where Pepperin sat. Only puddle of blood remained on the floor, and the demon realized that it disappeared in an unknown direction. The girl smiled cunningly, realizing that he was a master of hiding. Pepperin course hid behind the ruins, trying not to attract attention. The hero said angrily, realizing that she would soon find him because of pain in her shoulder. He knew her weaknesses and realized that she could do more treacherous. If she finds it, he will be able to fix everything. It was necessary to do something with her katana. While he was thinking, the demon shouted that, although he hid his presence, he would not be deceived. It would be necessary to bring her directly to him. Looking closely around, she focused on the ground under her feet, as if feeling a hidden threat. Smoke clubs were circling around her, and it seemed as if a hero was set before her. He undoubtedly sought their shelter for attack, but she felt his presence, so all his efforts were in vain. After saying these words, she directed katana to the approaching shadow. Her katana only cut the figure from the ice. Rin realized that only an illusion created by icy magic, and in fact, the goal was not her, but her katana. She heard she was ready to attack Pepperin. Without weapons, with only bare hands, Pepperin met with a demon. Rin looked at the hero who radiated the unwavering determination, and barely smiled noticeably. She wanted to hear his last words, because after all, he was destined to die of blood loss. The hero, breathing hard, stated that this would not happen, because he was going to enter. In this case, Rin asked him to act faster and sharply struck the Pepperin, who, without his strength, fell in front of her on one knee. She warned him, even if he took her katana, it does not mean that she will be able to win. But suddenly she felt the cold, and could not understand why her hand was freezing. Pepperin explained that, although with difficulties, he succeeded. He used his cold spells to freeze her hand, and the ice burned her skin, which causes it to glance at him with curses. With a smile on her face, Pepin told her about her victory. Seeing the blood in the ice, Rin immediately understood everything. She realized that she was being used to be a great danger. During the battle of time, there was no time. But now he realized that it was necessary to stop the bleeding urgently. Rin laughed at him. Teprin looked at her katana and realized that she returned to her former state, as did her strength. It was the first time he fought without preparing for surprises. The feelings were too real, and as it turned out, much of the hero did not know yet. The guy seemed like the sword, and he suggested taking it, but the hero refrained. It was enough to look at this blade to make it bad. Rin did not pay attention to it and asked if Pepin would live. Armed with a sword, the hero decided that it was better to kill her immediately, and then disappear with him. She looked at him and smiled noticeably. She decided that something was wrong with Pepperon, noticing his tears. She decided to find out why it happened, but Pepperon himself had no answer. It seemed that his ability to cool did not work. It was impossible to kill an ordinary person with a normal psyche. But if he did not destroy it, the threat is overhanging over him. Pepperon squeezed the sword even stronger, thinking what choice he should make. Suddenly they heard a voice who was surprised to ask what they were doing. It was a tire. The tire quickly realized that Rin was in a difficult situation, so the girl sharply ordered him to silence. She suspected that he came for her prey, and the tire confirmed it. The hero congratulated the tire, noting that he is alive and healthy. The tire answered the Pepperon that it did not look as good as it was completely exhausted. Of course, she agreed with him, noticing that she almost defeated him. The tire lifted his katana, and the hero thought he wanted to strike. To the surprise of all, the tire suddenly rolled katana into the body of Rin, and it was choked by blood. Rin immediately fell to the ground from the impact. Looking at her, the tire turned to Pepperon, asking him to give him a girl. Rin smiled to Demon, not quite understanding his actions. However, the tire did not pay attention to her and, contacting the hero, stated that there were unfinished cases between them. He understood perfectly how to lose a decisive blow. However, Pepperon considered it quite natural. And of course he agreed, having received gratitude from Shen. He believed that in such a state he would still not be able to kill her, and Shen came to his aid. Shen grabbed Rin by his tail and pulled behind him, planning to find out the relationship with the hero later. Peperna supported him, and then Rin was calling him. In this world, the hero becomes the one who survives, because death means defeat. But she was alive and sure that he was still ahead. Although she was really too cruel, her beauty remained indisputable. However, he believed that it could be much more appropriate. Suddenly, Rin had a feeling that she became superfluous. She approached the Pepperon and asked what he liked. Pepperon looked a little ashamed, and, thinking, remembered her face. Rin decided that in this case it was its type, but the hero immediately noted that he did not mean anything special. She finally realized why he could not forget her. It turns out that she considered it attractive, so close, cool, and sweet. When she watched the Rin, the guy blushed and realized how dishonest she was. Shane also looked at Rin, not understanding her at all, but Rin replied that he was not destined to understand her. Stroking the girl on the tail, the tire said goodbye to Pepin. Pepperon felt uncomfortable as if they were no longer enemies. However, he still saw their danger, so he remained alone in the middle of the ruins. However, he was calm that there were no comrades nearby. It is difficult to leak on the wall of the ruins. He did not want his team to see him in that state. I could never imagine that it would be so difficult for him. All this time, he focused on magical attacks, but the moment came to change the direction to protective techniques. With these thoughts, Pepper and ICS breathed hard. He needed a short break, after which he had to gather with the boys. Meanwhile, in the Grace, a 4-member team continued to move deeply deep. The team stood in front of a large hall, eagerly waiting for Ari. They hoped that the girl had already graduated, but she explained that she came across extremely rare and valuable material, so she asked them to wait a little more. He looked at the bodies and could not but be surprised how chaotic they were scattered. And those who attacked the girl outside were lying even further. From the darkness of the cave came a quiet curtain. The voice called them strangers, even though they were really here. A strange man in a hat decided to find out the guys which option would be the best for them. He proposed to disassemble them alive or posthumously. It was the spirit of a tortoise named Eridor, who gave the heroes such a spooky opportunity to choose. It turned out to be here for the main thing, and he noticed that this man was a real abomination. His words caused Eridor frantic rage. He could not understand how he dared to speak about him and treat him. So I decided that I would not leave the choice, calling for skeletons. Herdor summoned his subordinates, ordering them to kill the heroes, directing attacks on them. He could not allow such a solution and began to destroy the skeletons. Against them standing in his face, he came to the conclusion that it was the boundary of Eridor's possibilities. Then he mercilessly destroyed the skeletons in front of him. His face was exposed by a vulgar smile. He could not understand that they were able to defeat his most powerful creature. Looking at Pachai, unbelievably not understanding who he is, thus annoying him. The kerosene, being behind the enemy, replied that they did not need the choice when it comes to dismembering opponents. Only Mr. Pepperon had the right to make such decisions. And saying this, the kerosene made an air attack on the enemy. Eridor fell to the ground, cursing a demon who told him quite another. Lakai asked again about the demon girl, but Eridor replied that they had already seen her. Lal did not know this, and did not understand what Eridor said. However, the enemy did not know all the details. He was simply ordered to kill them. This demon stated that he would destroy the pepper in himself. August realized that in this case, Mr. Pepperon is in danger if it was worth the truth. Lala immediately offered to go back to find Mr. Pepperon. He called Gas with him, saying that they would go together and ask the girls to move forward. Lala wanted to deny. However, they still have to go all the way to the end, because it was the main purpose of their journey. Lala decided that it would be, and he asked Huss to follow him. Lala and Eri were left with a prison who laughed straight at their backs. He could not contain her smiles from how easily they came under control. Lala annoyed, and she asked him to repeat the said. However, Eridor decided to answer only one phrase. Then they needed to beware of the ghost because even he would not be able to overcome this creature. According to Eridor, its appearance was extremely terrible. Meanwhile, Ren was already in the capital of Grace, in the surrounding forest. She remembered the image of Pepperon and sighed deeply, seeking to meet him again. She tried to remember the last meeting with him, but Shim, who pulled her behind, noted that the hours had not passed. Rin felt heavily breathed, realizing how time was slowly. Smiling, she replied that Pepin still remains her goal. Fortunately, the tire decided to let her go, which was surprised by Rin. She was convinced that he was about to kill her, but the tire could not put an end to her life in that condition. At that moment, he had already recovered, and Ren realized what was going on. Starting in his stomach, he paid her, and now she could do everything she wants. Rind smiled, noticing changes in the behavior of the tire, and guessed that it was all through Pepperin. It was unclear why the hero left him alive last time, and even now he could not explain it. It may have made some sense, or he just wanted. Sin suggested that, repeating his actions, he would be able to understand his idea. With these reflections, with a slight smile on his face, he directed his gaze into the night sky. Taking a short break, Pepperon decided to return to the team and was already standing at the entrance to the dungeon. He was able to heal his wounds, but the skill of being cold-blooded was still lost. Pepperon decided that he had to catch up with the boys as soon as possible, but he was scared to go. When he delved into darkness, he did not know how to act. Lala was worried about the hero, hoping that everything would be fine with him, and Eerie reassured her, assured that everything would be fine with Mr. Pepperon. Lala trusted Eerie's words. Meanwhile, because of the horn, they looked at them a dark silhouette and smiled. The female voice suddenly stopped the girls, warning that they should not come here. The warning belonged to a woman who had long gone to another world, the baths. The bathtub was angry when she realized that she had been ignored. Eerie and Lala, apparently, did not even suspect who she was, so Banshee decided to ask them about it. In the gaze, Paula read something frightening and eerie. She wanted to know what she needed, because there was no time for games. Her fearlessness was knocked down from the panthel of the baths. Banshee said that there was someone named Daberson nearby, and he was very dangerous, urged the girls to be careful with him. Lala remembered Eberson. The former enemy has already warned them of this threat. Amberson eaten the flesh of people, a spectacle not for the weak-minded. Once she tried to scare the girls, warning that if they went on, he would eat them. However, Lala and Eri continued their journey forward, and Banshee shouted after them, so that they would not ignore her warnings. It became so angry that she decided to curse on Lala and Arya. She repeatedly warned her of the curse, but the girls looked at Banshee with emotionally. Suddenly, Ben, with a cry of murder, rushed to Lalo, but Lala, without even clutching her eye, grabbed her hands and stopped her. Bella, looking at Banshee, offered her, if she sought to curse them, let her try. Smiling, with a swelling on her head, she confessed that the girls were very strong, and that she was waiting for such development from the Pale. They thought they would be able to defeat Amberson, but Lala asked them to be quieter. Eric felt embarrassment because Lala now managed the monster. Banshee mentally reflected how much she is annoyed by Lala because she now forced her to lead her to him. She tried to warn once again that it is better not to move on. Eerie agreed with this and decided that time to return to Mr. Pepperon. The second did not have time to pass as the head of the bath was already separated. Behind the girls' backs appeared a monster who held this head in front of him. Eerie watched with horror how the monster greedily swallows Banshee's head. Suddenly, he began to apologize to Lala and Eerie for seeing him in such an unattractive condition. A few decades have passed since he dealing with any affairs, and for so long that he had no effort to even complain. However, they were surprised by their appearance, although he could just eat them. There was no other than the ghost of Amberson's dungeon. He just forgot that he had not yet introduced himself and called himself Amberson. They replied that they had already heard about him as a formidable opponent, and Amberson suggested that the prison had told them about it. Remembering him, he felt a slight attack of nostalgia. They used to play chess with him. Amberson stood behind the girls, and Lala refused him, noting that they had no time to listen to his stories. Yuri suggested looking for something, after which they planned to just leave. Emerson noted that it was quite gloomy and did not feel any desire to continue the conversation. However, before he had completed his phrase, Arius hit the ghost, forcing her head to fly. He was going to say that he had no desire to fight them. However, on their part, it looked different, and Amacion understood them. As he clicking his fingers, they were instantly in the farthest dungeon room. More specifically, it was his own room. Amberson already guessed that the girls were looking for something. This is exactly what adventurers and robbers come. Having said these words, he absorbed the scroll in his room. Deciding that it was time to leave the games and dine, he noted that the girls have attractive figures. To begin with, Amberson decided to move to the main dish, while noticing how the Thor's blouse opened to the breasts. He considered her beautiful because her body looked seductive. Left only in the cover, Lala realized that the only thing left to do was to fight. Looking at these two, Yari felt discomfort from his words. Looking at an attractive figure, she involuntarily touched her breasts. She asked them to reduce the speed, which caused them surprise and made her asking her questionable look. Here he asked Amberson what he meant when he said that her body was appetizing. Amberson apologized and confessed that he liked to work with women's breasts. It was not very polite on his part, but he said Eerie that she has almost no feminine forms, and her appetite would not affect it either. Eerie was amazed, but Amberson reassured her, promising that he would eat her too. Eerie began the wards with anger and demanded that she be paced with him. Amberson, realizing that he had affected the female pride, just smiled. After he pounced on the Era, he decided that she would become his prey before the meal. Meanwhile, Pepperon was still at the entrance to the dungeon. Hearing the steps, he realized that someone was approaching. Fearing that it could be a monster, he hid behind the debris. However, after the hero, kerosene appeared and packets. Pepperon came out to meet them, asking what they were doing here. Paka gladly noted that Pepperon was in order, and the kerosene suggested that they were discussing everything on the road. Pepperon looked at the boys, hoping that in their company he would cease to cover fear. When Pepperon raced through the cave rapidly, he was thinking about Rin, who initially aimed at him. But in the end, she was defeated again and again. Thanks to her, their path was cleared, and they continued to go forward. However, the kerosene also struck the prison, whom they underestimated. Pepper realized that the hardest thing is yet to come. The boys first got here, and may not know that Amberson's ghost, who was in the farthest room, was immortal. Having met him in the way, the only thing left was to flee. He was worried about Lala and Ari, trying to make sure that everything was fine. Pepperon noted that they had already come here, but they could not come to an end. He would not want them to meet here again with danger. Laughing, Eric came to offer the girl a game. After focusing, he instantly created a fire and boldly rushed to the enemy. After the attack, she created a spell for strengthening and causing a powerful air stroke. The enemy turned out to be too fast and was quiet behind Eerie. Noting that this spell had not affected him, neither magic nor weapons nor a ball, nothing at all. Pressing the enemy and dropping it on the floor, Amberon stretched, noting that he had not felt such heating for a long time. However, his attention was immediately attracted by Eric, who was still heading for him. He noticed that she was a decisive girl who asked Lolly to retreat. Eric used a huge fire. However, the enemy remained unbreakable. Gathering all the flames in his hands, he promised to turn it back. Having reached out, he directed a giant flame to the Era. and she managed to activate protection in time. Emerson thought that ER had already realized that she was not winning. She agreed, but became interested in others. She was wondering why, having such power, he still stays here. It was a really interesting question that Amberx decided to answer. He was simply locked here. Decades ago, he was imprisoned for Lattice, imposing a magic seal that he had never been able to get out again. Reflections about it were caused in it immediately, forcing the discovery to remember that magic. He remembered how Eerie mentioned the crypt. She appeared in front of her, which she immediately lifted. She smiled, because Amberson was so foolish that she confessed in her weaknesses. Amberson engulfed fear when she realized what the girl was planning to do. We directed the flask to the spirit and used a storage that began to absorb it. He could not believe that he was in this glass trap. He demanded not to laugh at him, shouting that it is simply impossible. Cry came from the flask. He exclaimed that this magic obey only the chosen, and at the time of his imprisonment, 4 sorcerers participated in this ritual. She closed the bottle, thought of Amber and felt boredom. At least now she had good material. She was tired of being guarded in this majestic place. She hoped that the boys would return soon, because the enemies were not visible anywhere. Nobo swept the yard and did not even know what she was talking about. Finsesh confessed that she was bored, and then Nobu was offered to help the villagers. Suddenly, someone called a Nobo. Outing around, he saw a wise demon named Dorosi, who reported that the cleaning was over. Nobo thanked her for his remarkable support. Finsesh shook his hand to the future warrior, inviting him to work out. Harpia suggested that Doroi be strengthened together to protect Gloria Septum. Nobo replied that she comes from the family of wise demons, so the melee is not their strength. As for the study of magic, it is not as easy as it seems, but it would gladly agree. The Phoenician remembered Eerie, who was able to fight, but Nobo noticed that she was special. Asia only sighed deeply, hoping for the rapid return of the Pepperon group. At that moment, screams and desperate exclamations were heard through the walls of the dungeon. Emerson shouted that he was close, and he was for the first time in such a limited space. He asked what Eerie thought. She looked closely at the test tube, intending to release him from an unacceptable essence to make his heart pure. She was ready to work as a subject for Aurea forever. Amberon shouted that he could not be the subject. Eerie looked at him with an even smile, as suddenly someone's steps were heard in the door. These were Pepperon and the pack that approached them. Inside, they saw Arya demonstrated Lali Kolb, holding the object of her experiment. Lala was glad that Pepperon was safe and was not injured. Pepperon was also glad that everything was fine with them. The battle seemed cruel when his gaze accidentally fell on the open breasts of the Lala. Lala instantly covered and apologized for this unforeseen moment. The girl, noticing the wounded shoulder of her lord, forgot about the naked breasts. Pepperon assured her that it was little things, and that the blood had already stopped. Lala immediately realized that she had to act, and with inspiration corrected the skirt. She cultivated the hero's wound, explaining that he is a significant figure for the country, and that it cannot be left unattended. The reprint just apologized to her. He wondered if they saw Amberson's ghost. Eerie in response showed him his test tube. Parapeering was stunned by the fact that they managed to catch it in some way. Eerie explained that she used the magic of the chest. It turned out that ordinary attacks did not work, and the hero did not even know that such a decision was possible. Amberon looked at a low man and noted that he looked unusual. Lala replied to this that she was Mr. Pepperon himself, if he was curious. Pepin did not understand what the interlocutor meant when Amberson told about the times when they were hunting, and what he thought that all the dwarves had disappeared from the face of the earth. He did not understand anything too, because there were many such as Mr. Pepperon. Gus mentioned that he was still human. Suddenly, she fell on the floor that scared everyone around. The boys ran to her, asking if she was fine with her. It turned out that she spent too much magic. Pepperon decided that you need to think about the plan and return. Lala apologized, and did not know how to inform him about it. Anderson proclaimed that he had a plane in his sleeve. The ghost offered them an agreement. He would give them a plan, and they would release it. Lala immediately exclaimed that he was lying. Pepperon hinted that it was better for them to go home, hoping that Area would invent something else. Subsequently, a group of students returned to the village, tired and exhausted. Finosia greeted them, and Nubo noticed that everyone had returned goals. Coco wondered the fate of Pepperon, and Nobo replied that their team had gone to the Grace's dungeon. However, Huchai, along with others, begged her to stop, because they were extremely exhausted. Ria met with a Hath, but both immediately looked around. Nobo noticed that something ambiguous happened between them, and Coco told how everything was. Recently hatched, constantly argued where they should move, from the forest to the cave. They constantly claimed to go to the right, but the loop was insisting on the left. So their relationship was spoiled, and Nobo realized everything that was happening. However, the most important was the fact that they overcame the King of Snail and won the necessary material. Nobo praised them for their wonderful work and advised to relax. Riche suggested that everyone swim and enjoy Coco. Everyone was captured by the adventure with Riche's. At that time, the gentleman approached the Nobo to hand him an item found in the cave. It is a necklace in the shape of a heart, and if you wear it, your nervous system immediately feels better. Such a treasure is really rare. The master suggested that in this case be transferred to Mr. Pepron, as it would be strange if she did it. Nobo had a different opinion. In his opinion, it would be better if she handed a necklace in person. Silbo smiled and noted that Popple would be extremely satisfied. Panya similar shared his opinion. The boys shouted, and the gentleman shouted that she was already rushing. Saying goodbye to Nobo, she hurried to catch up with others, and Nobo wished her success. A few days later, the boys returned to the village. Nobo greeted Paperprawn, and the protagonist hoped that nothing had happened during their absence. Titan told how Gorkus once came to them, but Funai quickly dealt with them. Whether the babies returned, he thought, and Nobo assured that they had coped with the task, although he thought of doubting in their teamwork. Pepperon agreed that they would still master this skill. Pepperon praised the whole team for his brilliant work. He decided that he would hold a meeting and ask the boys to rest. Reese, Coco, and Gentleman were looking out from behind the bushes. Reese told her friend that the hero had returned, and Coco expressed his hope that the master would give him an expected gift. The gentleman was scattered and trying to collect her feelings. In her head swarm thoughts of how best to turn to him or just congratulate him. At the same time, she thought it could sound surprisingly on her part. She did not understand why she was holding a necklace and could not calm down. The Cut and Coco cheered their girlfriend, and the master replied that it was already on the road. The master wanted to call Pepin when Lala did. Lala believed that it would be difficult for him to cope with other things through Manu, so she suggested her help. The hero replied that everything was fine and refused to help, asking him to leave him alone. Lala did not deny, and Phanesia noticed that Pepperon was sad. Both suspected that something had happened in the dungeon. He continued the whole way, but he was probably just tired. He also felt even more exhausted, so he decided to fall asleep. Phenocia suggested that the fight be launched, but he politely asked her to retreat. At that time, Phoenicia tried to care for Ariel, but also refused here. The night was already prevailing, and Pepperon was still lying on a bed without sleep, immersed in his thoughts. Reflecting on Rena's demon, Pepperon was so absorbed by his thoughts that he soon could not stand and got out of bed. In order to freshen up in the air, he resolutely moved to the exit of the team. Lifting his head, he became interested in the magical beauty of the starry sky, which he had never seen before. He mentioned the words of how outstanding the ruler he is for his country. Sitting on the grass, he thought. Suddenly, steps came behind his back and he turned. The look of the maiden reflected no less surprise. Meeting with the hero was a real surprise for her. He guessed that something unusual happened, once the lady did not sleep. However, the girl assured that this was not the case, and insomnia was the cause of anxiety. She just came here, looking for silence. There was a unique silence here, where all the anxieties disappeared, as if they were never. Pepron suggested that she join and sit next to him. Pondon felt inconvenienced because of the lack of a topic for conversation, although he offered to sit side by side. He also thought of how to start a conversation, and thought about the necklace she could now hand over. Ponderin wondered their trip to the cave, to which Pondor replied that everything was well. Worried, she repeated the question, adding that she heard about a strong opponent. Pondor smiled and said that the hero defeated the demons and defended everyone. Pepperin agreed, considering their conversation a little strange. The hero was thinking about what happened, but the master assured him that it was nothing special. In addition, it did not stand out. Everyone demonstrated their skills, but she did nothing like that. It was most concerned that others could consider it unselfish. Pepron noticed changes in herself. When she was captured by the BBC, she showed more courage. However, now there was a person she liked, and it distracted her thoughts. Pepron did not realize which of her beloved she spoke, and only at that moment did the master realize that she expressed it aloud. While she was thinking of saying, the guy decided that it was about Riza. He realized her and realized that she did not want others to see her weaknesses. A loved one could rise, noticing weaknesses, and he understands this fear, because he felt the same. However, Pepperon believed that at least once in his life he faced this feeling. But nevertheless, he had friends who accepted him as he was. In glory, Septim is always ready to support the other. Pepperon believed in the lady, that she would find her appointment and become more confident. He urged her to be bolder, and the world would change for her, although he was not sure of everything himself. The master remembered the bravery and squeezed the necklace. He called the Pepperon loudly. She stretched the suspension and said she found him in the cave. She wanted to give it to him because this amulet reassures the one who wears it. The master asked him to accept. Pepperon reached out to the necklace and gladly agreed to accept it. Although he doubted that he would somehow influence him now, it is better to have him than nothing. As soon as he took the decoration, he and the lady shone light, which surprised them. Pepperon remembered the situation with the necklace and decided that the master was guilty. The Sirek was stunned. Where did so much magic come from? He believed that the most important thing was to restore the skill of cold-bloodedness, but now a huge amount of magic raged in it. Pepperon guessed that the gentleman could strengthen him, but it seemed unlikely. She couldn't even manage the light, but maybe it was something else. He remembered the words of Rin. She already told that he had penetrated the air forces and stole something valuable from them. Having frozen on the spot, he was lost in the assumption that he could steal the master in the air forces. The master was already escaping, saying goodbye to her. Pepperon wished him a good night. The hero, in response, spent her gaze, thinking who this gentleman was. The malicious laughter echoed from the laboratory of Arius. She finally completed her work. Using the body of the Snail King from Timon's cave and the spiritual essence of the Grace Dungeon, she created a forbidden potion. Taking a bottle of potion to her hands, she exclaimed that it was called a proportion. One sip could give her a dreamy figure, as if in a dream. And now no one would dare call her immaturity. She prepared only one portion that should have enough. But here he began to be nervous, but still decided to start its transformation. Suddenly the door of the room opened to Finnegy, offering to go hunting. Finnesh, seeing the elixir in front of him, wondered what it was. She was advised to drink, assuring that his taste is pleasant, and our new hunting will become spectacular. She felt a wonderful transformation in her body. Breasts have increased unexpectedly, tearing her clothes on it. She smiled and asked that it was a feeling, because it became so good. Eerie, moved to tears, thought about her dream, which finally came true. She got the desired figure. When the opportunity disappeared, the finalness laughed and noted that it was interesting. 10 minutes passed, and Finny returned to herself. Eerie asked Eerie to use magic again. Eerie tried to prove that it was not her. She believed that if the result did not last at least a day, it did not make sense. She was relieved when she eventually came across a call for the altar. Breathing calmly, she cast her gaze on Emberson. The spirit thanked Irai, because it was thanks to her that he was able to revive, and it almost caused her joy. Emerson thought that he had not breathed such fresh air for a long time, and it was upset by Eerie. But according to Benshi, this room was as cozy as the basement. Morrison could not figure out how Benshi could speak like that. Having annoyed, Benshi ordered him to stop talking like a girl. Looking at Benshi, who was here, she was surprised why only her head was present. Benshi reminded that her whole body was eaten, leaving only the skull. In this case, she suggested that she go and find it. But the spirit, in a panic, asked how it is possible. She begged not to talk about such unrealistic things without any useful purpose. Carrie was already going to convey the plan of Pepperon and go to bed, allowing the baths to act as he pleased. However, suddenly something unexpected happened. The yellow baths, at the moment when the Yiar suddenly felt the impetus, turned to the wet. Without understanding anything, Yeri ran to Amberson. She felt a strange feeling and touched her lips. Everything was different from the ghost, which could only mean one. It turned out that she got into the body of Eerie. Emerson was embarrassed and addressed Eerie with the question of what had happened. The girl replied that everything is fine. She decided to take a little stroll and asked the spirit to take care of cleaning, which he gladly agreed. Along with the body of the Ares, the girls argued lively. Ares ordered the baths to leave her body, but she was not going to do so, assuring that she would not cause any harm. Banish eyes shone with grip when she dreamed of what pranks could arrange while in the body of Ari. Ari asked not to do anything strange, but Banshee imagined something else. Standing outside, she lifted her skirt, opening her stockings, and Ari scared to stop her immediately. Lala glittered from behind to Ari and asked what she was doing. The group was not at all pleased with its appearance, and Ari also shared this dissatisfaction. She continued to run next to his body, planning to embody her revenge and send Lala to the other end of the world. Then she pointed her finger and exclaimed that Mr. Pepperon was here, and Lala thought it was called. She called Lala Durepo and ordered her to die, using the magic of a deadly frame. Iri felt that her voice wanted to warn Lala, and turned. Suddenly, she grabbed the elf to her chest and embarrassed her. Laughing, Banshee in Iri's body noted that she had good breasts, and pale. Frightened, she exclaimed to Iri, not understanding what was happening. A patient named Alice Torret came to the village and greeted Pepperin. Pepperin became interested in hoping for something interesting, and Alice reported that he had a plan and documents. The hero asked to show them to him. During their conversation, the Reese and his comrades suddenly exclaimed that the merchant had arrived. They saw how the hero bought something from him, and it made them rethink something. He suggested that the boys make their purchases. They could buy magical books, train in secret, and then surprise everyone. The lady was very liked by the idea of Riza. Reese asked if she had money, which he received a confession. She had only 100 gold coins, which is clearly not enough for their needs. That's suggested to summarize, and Coco confessed that she also had only 100. The master was in the same situation. Having collected all the coins, they had 300 gold coins on the account. Meanwhile, Pepperon took the merchant plans for the average level of experiments and the estate himself. Considering the documents, Pepperon was impressed with the beautiful drawings and asked how much he would have to pay for it. The merchant set a price of 45,000 gold for everything. Pepperon agreed and asked about the magic book. Alice replied that he has 3 copies. Protective spells, 3rd-grade sandals, and 2nd-class ice laser. The hero took the book into his hands, and his surprise was no boundaries. She turned out to be a 2nd class. The 3rd-grade book cost 20,000, but this 2nd grade cost 35,000. In total, the cost reached as much as 55,000. The student decided that in the future, he would cooperate with Ayla and ask for a discount, putting his hand on the shoulder of the merchant. Ayla was discouraged a little, but could not refuse the hero. The grader agreed to reduce the price to 8,000, and Pepperin noted that working with him was a continuous pleasure. The merchant also reciprocated, expressing his joy from communication. Having come out with a large package, Ailes thanked for the purchase, and Pepperon rejoiced in a successful exchange. Now he had the opportunity to learn more about the city. The merchant attracted Pepperon's attention. In addition, the goods were inexpensive, which was even more attractive to him. Ailes, looking at the map, tried to define the way to the next city, as suddenly came across girls. The merchant, noticing the guys from the famous Septima, decided that they were looking for something. Again, they asked if they could buy a magic book for their 300 gold. The merchant noted that there was nothing for that amount, and recalled that the manuals had just bought Pepperon. Coco confessed that he wanted to train secretly to surprise everyone. The master decided that he had nothing for 300. Reese's eyes shone with joy. It was a methamphetamine capsule capable of turning you into who you want to become. The lady seemed to be an incredibly interesting opportunity to reincarnate. The merchant also said that 1 bottle acts for 30 minutes, and if you divide it into 3, each will have 10 minutes. Taking the potion into his hands, the gentleman seemed to make it much sense. However, this is not quite true, because it all depends on the imagination. It is these potions that help to develop the imagination. It usually cost 500 gold, but by diligent girls, Ailes decided to give a discount. Of course, it remained a secret for Pepper. Rise was satisfied and thanked the merchant by waving goodbye. The girls immediately ran into the forest to train, thinking who would turn into. Ailes, watching them, smiled and thought that Glorious Septum was a truly city that could impress. Banshee still did not want to leave the body of Yuri, who reached fatigue from everything in the world. Yura decided that she was not destined to win, and her self-esteem fell even lower. She begged Banshee finally to leave. However, she needed to convey a plan of Pepperin, and the baths remembered it. The Hoblin Whirlwind picked up parchment. Looking at him more closely, he immediately realized that this is exactly the plan to convey to Mr. Pepperon. Ben was actually attractive, and it encouraged her to one idea. Iri, gathering all her strength, begged her not to do it. She approached Hus, reporting that she needed his help. she winking fully and asking for a plan to pass the pepper on in exchange for the fulfillment of any huss's desire. Eri realized that her situation was hopeless. Eri looked carefully at Eric, trying to understand something, and he thought he may have found an answer. Gus realized that such words would never break from the mouth of Eri. She realized that she just panicked because of many experiments. This made Eri fall out of exhaustion. Looking after us, the girl realized how we really treated her. Although the band considered it true, Eri ordered her to silence. In the end, Erigot was so tired of all this that he was already sneezing. He sneezed so much that the girl's head just flew, which surprised Gas. He walked to his head, lifted her, and not realizing that she represents here for the band, remembering that the girl from the dungeon grace, Eri cast a look full of threat to the boy, deciding that he should forget everything that had just happened. It also concerned the baths. Both were waiting for the lessons, and the kerosene from the baths looked at the Eri and Korra. The kerosene immediately replied that he had completely forgotten about it, and Banshee supported him. Meanwhile, the hum in the forest attracted attention. The wolves were chasing the cat. Who could think of something terrible? She had to immediately inform Mr. Pepperin, otherwise she was threatened with inevitable death. Finding a cozy place that was perfect for practice, they decided to try it in action. Coco wondered whether the Lord had already grown up. Who would be reincarnated? Growing has not yet decided, and the gentleman also reflected on it. She thinks a figure like Lala, which may like Pepin. The girl was slightly chopped, a little confused, but her friends advised to drink a drink. Gathering with thoughts, the master agreed. They lifted glasses for each other and went to business. Reese has already tasted her drink, dreaming of who would turn. She dreamed of becoming an adult as soon as possible, goblin, who masterfully possesses a sword and magic. But the Reese sought to turn into a little sister of that kid elf. The master should ask their choice, but decided that it was not worth the effort. The master went into thought when a cat suddenly approached her. She was delighted with his cute look. The master could already reincarnate, although her breasts looked a little strange. She was glad that Coco was able to become an adult. Mr. dreamed that Riaz would pay attention to it and draw her view to her. The girls were shocked when they saw that Reese turned into a baby. Keeping her in her hands, Coco could not understand why it happened. The Reese turned into a baby. The gentleman doubted that Reese was generally aware of his transformation. Coco suggested that the master had not yet consumed the potion, but the master assured that she had already done it. She did not leave her feeling that something was missing. One realized that she made the mistake of somewhere, but Coco stunned at her girlfriend's figure. Looking at her hands that turned into paws, the master realized that she became a cat. Coco was glad that the medication lasted only 10 minutes, and the gentleman also calmed down. Half an hour has passed, and nothing has changed. The master with despair lowered her head, because 10 minutes have long been long ago. But the merchant warned, if you divide the dose by 3, each will only get 10 minutes. He may have slid another drug, and the girls thought that they would never be able to return to their past. They had to contact Mr. Pepperin, even if he was angry. Suddenly something was over behind, and when they turned, they saw that the monsters appeared ahead. Without any hesitation, they rushed. Hardly sighing, she thought that they were lost with the other. It seemed to her that children were not always the flowers of life. Looking at, Coco called Mr. However, when the Coco looked around, the gentleman should already be used. Meanwhile, Mr. Tikala, I am convinced that in this way he will certainly avoid their danger. During the escape, she escaped through a stone and crashed into a tree. At that moment, it seemed to her that it was an end when an explosive impetus was suddenly. She was amazed by Mr. Pepperon, and did not understand what he was doing here. Mr. Pepperon smiled and assured that everything was fine with his magic. The lady carefully lifted her in her arms. The hero was amazed by the existence of such monsters, and suddenly revealed something familiar. It seemed to the hero as if he had seen it before. The color of the fur gave him only one mention. He called the cat's cat, and he waved his paws as if trying to say something. Understanding this, Pepin decided to take him to the village first. He did not predict this, and the master hoped for salvation. The girl wondered what to do next, planning to go to the forest. Luland noted her and asked who she was. Coco looked a little confused and decided that the girl seeking to join the community of Gloria. Allah pulled the girl behind, wanting to find Mr. Pepperin, but on the way they joined them. He immediately recognized Coco, but remained surprised, not understanding which they belonged to the races. Marco could not open his mouth with confusion, but had a boil from rage. They were children who, without permission, purchased some potion from which they could now regain their former appearance. Lala quarreled Coco, but Nobu asked her not to be angry because they did not do anything wrong. He also supported this opinion. For them, everything was valuable, and Noboy supported them in this. Lala ordered them to silence, and they obediently obeyed. Coco warned no longer to do so, because the medicines could harm them. Coco apologized, and at that moment Lucy came, which he noticed. From the action of medication, she turned into a baby while Lucy could not believe. But in a moment, she gently held the baby in her arms, passionately talking, what she was sweet. Recently, Reese has become so independent that she almost forgot how it was to be an older sister. Now she was again waiting for the role of caring guardian for her sister. She told that they were surrounded by monsters in the forest, and first they ran together and then split. But there was no in the village, so Lala offered to go in search of right now. Recently, Pachabran went into the forest. Lala was indignant that he had sent him himself, but Kobold suggested that he make a company. However, Pepperon refused. He wanted to be alone. Lala, in a panic, suggested that something could happen to him when they suddenly heard the voice of a hero who asked what was happening. Keeping the gentleman in his arms, he thought they were wrong. She was glad that everything was fine with him, and wanted to tell him about it, but noticed the monster in the hero's arms. Pepperon kindly stroked the cat on his head, explaining that he was really a master. All around were stunned and could not believe their eyes. Coco told the boys about what happened. The merchant stated that if they share the potion, its action would only last 10 minutes. However, Fishing noted that the effect of potion was completely different, and Nobu faced the first in life. If the ability to do so was to enhance the effects of different skills, it was impossible to leave it unattended. It could be extremely dangerous. In addition, the hero was interested in the BBC. He forbade 3 women to leave the village for a while. He also asked Coco to report him about any strange changes, and she agreed. Lucy asked the Reese if she was clear to her and called her a smart. The gentleman turned into a cat, and he warned that she would be overflowing if she meets with Fina. Lala only now noted that she was not nearby, because she was usually the most laviest of all. Others also thought about the disappearance of the lounger. At that time, the Airphizerid Empire was reigning. The dark figure with a mustache asked how Olivia had been abducted. The man replied that they were carefully investigating this, believing that the lady was still alive. A man with a mustache wanted to understand what it means. Another explained that he heard that he was happy with the Valiant Four in the same prison with her. The reason he was there was a mystery, but his intentions were clearly hidden. General Liu was convinced that Pepperoni would certainly handle it. In this case, they were ordered to go to Gloria for help. Rock and Manasses hoped for success, and the boys agreed with order.